Chat. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational or entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a medical concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. So welcome everybody to another HG stream. Hope y'all are doing well today. Hello. So super hyped for not only today, but this month. We're going to hop into a conversation with Destiny in just a couple minutes. So I really respect a lot of the work Destiny does. I think Boomer Echo. Hold on a second. Is that better? Testing? Okay. Yeah, I think it's better now. Okay. For some reason, there was a new source, which should not have been there. So huge respect for Destiny, and just I appreciate the way he analyzes things and his opinion on stuff. It's not my place to pass judgment on whether he is right or wrong, but I personally learn a lot from the way that he thinks and the way that he represents his views. So we're honored to talk to Destiny today, just a little bit about what's been going on, and especially his thoughts on mental health and what's going on across the world with mental health. Other things just to tune y'all into. So every year we do Mental Health May is a way to try to help people who are struggling with their mental health. We try to raise awareness about particular issues. We try to understand, okay, what is the stuff that y'all are dealing with that is kind of novel and that you may not be able to get support elsewhere about. So we tend to cover a lot of topics that there aren't, for example, diagnoses about. So like we talk a lot about burnout and imposter syndrome and things like that. And this year we're going to actually be focused on making about 12 to 14 hard-hitting videos on topics that are really, really important to talk about. So we've already done a couple about trauma. I think we're going to have a stream on Friday that is going to be sort of a deep dive into trauma. So super interested in doing this. This is something that's been a little bit tricky because a lot of times people will ask about trauma in our community. And trauma is the kind of thing that I just don't think you can do you can sort of do a 15-minute video on that, and we can try to do that, and we will be doing some of that. But I think trauma is definitely one of these topics where a more comprehensive understanding is really important. And then other things that we tend to do, we also will be innovating a couple of things, which is kind of what we do. So as problems that we face in the world begin to change, we think that we need to adapt to change with them. It's part of the reason that we have a stream, right, where we talk to people like Destiny, and we have things like a YouTube channel that has videos on everything from, why do you get high and watch motivational videos on YouTube to why do I get this burst of energy and motivation at 2 a.m. to more simple stuff like more classic kind of mental health sort of stuff, like what is borderline personality disorder? How can I understand anxiety? We should have a video coming out about like internet rage and motivation and how those two things are actually linked. And it's really interesting what kind of science there is behind that. And then, of course, we have things like our coaching program and Dr. K's guide. So if y'all are interested in more comprehensive mental health resources that are a little bit more longitudinal and build on each other and don't really fit the attention span of the internet today, definitely check out Dr. K's guide. I explain a lot about how I think about illness when I'm sitting with a patient. And then we've got a coaching program that has now helped over 12,000 people in 119 countries. And what we tend to focus on is things like finding direction, finding purpose, finding motivation, overcoming some of your bad habits, and really trying to build a life that is worth living. So, and the other thing is we're going to be kind of all over the place. So we're not focused on one particular platform or place. I'm going to be doing a fair amount of traveling, for example, over the month of May, and we're going to sort of be trying to spread our message and raise awareness of the problems that people face. We'll be going on everything from, streaming on YouTube, streaming on Twitch, to going on various podcasts, and even doing things like going to the National Conference of the American Psychiatric Association towards the end of May, where we'll be doing a piece over there. So stay tuned and try to follow us around if you can, and stay tuned to all of our stuff, because we're not going to be like focused on, we're just going to do this thing, here all the time. So yeah, let's see if we can hop in with Destiny. I am going to, let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, I have a new thing that I'm trying to figure out how to use. And let's see if I can get this to work. So we're going to do this. Yo, dude, can I have just 1 second to make sure my overlays are functional? Okay, you're still muted, and I'm going to just do that. Thank you so much. So kind. Let's see. No. Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to... Oh, no. Yeah, I'm live, but for some reason I can't show your video. Oh, there we go. Okay, I got it. Okay. Are you live? Okay. So I'm going to transition. I think we're good. Can you just count to 10 for me?
1, 2, 3,
Perfect.
4. Cool.
How you been, man?
Busy,
I see that. Yeah, I've seen that you're out and about and doing all kinds of things and talking to all sorts of interesting people.
Absolutely, yeah.
I love the work that you've been doing, man. I love listening to you, the way that you think about things, the way that you frame things. Also the way that you stay on track when you're talking to people who may get off track. That I think is particularly impressive.
Thank you. Yeah. So a lot of deliberate work and practices gone into trying to keep conversations on track. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and yeah, like how things are going for you?
It's everything. I don't know. I guess for a sample, when I'm doing it 2 weeks, I'm going on some 10 million Instagram crypto podcast, I think in Vegas. Then I'm probably going to do a podcast the day after with Lily Pichu. Then I'm probably going to do a podcast with Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks. And then I'm probably going to do the whatever podcast. So it's just like everything. I'm just, all over the world right now. That's what I'm doing, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah, I think, I don't know where you want to go with this. I can talk about a million things for...
Yeah, so I'd love to hear just your take on what's going on with mental health in America as a microcosm and also across the world as a whole. Like if you just... have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, okay, sure, yeah. For mental health stuff, there's always like 4... Well, hold on. How have you been doing? I've been out of the Twitch world for a little bit, so... I see you got a new background right now. Did you move or what's going on?
Yeah, so we've been pretty busy and overall things are going pretty well for the most part. I think we've grown quite a bit. I think one of the things that we sort of leaned into recently over the last year or two is like, what is actually our mission? Mm-hmm. And we're trying to help as many people as possible with the emerging mental health problems that like people are facing. And so over the last year and a half, I think interestingly enough, a lot of what we've done has been offline. Mm-hmm. So doing a lot of stuff with different organizations, like collaborating with different orgs, kind of like NAMI, or even doing some stuff with the Office of the U.S. Surgeon General, or doing stuff with the American Psychiatric Association, giving talks at places like universities in Spain and places like that. So there's been a fair amount of travel as well. And cool. I think that, and then we've also sort of focused a little bit more on making content that's a little bit more like library focused in the sense that people can access it in the future. Mm-hmm. So I was running into this big problem with live streaming where if I do a live stream today, the people tomorrow may not learn from it, right? So we were getting the same questions over and over and over again. So that's sort of, in a sense, unsatisfying from a content creation standpoint. But I think the bigger problem is that if we explained something really well, it was very hard for people to find. And so what that sort of means is that we're always addressing the surface level issues, which don't always help people.
Gotcha.
And so for deeper stuff, sorry.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead. For deeper stuff?
For deeper stuff, we kind of, so we've been a little bit more focused on making sure that our YouTube stuff is like more organized, that people can access things. And then we've also been building like different kinds of community-based interventions. So we're noticing, for example, that people are having more difficulty socializing. And so if you're having difficulty socializing, what can you do about that? This is the kind of thing where one solution is you can go see a therapist and they can help you with social anxiety. But the other solution is that you can like literally practice socialization. So we had an event on Valentine's Day where like 300 people showed up and we just practiced asking each other out on dates.
Gotcha.
Because that's hard. And one of the trickiest things is that if you like someone and you ask them out on a date and you're rusty at asking people out on dates, you kind of shoot your shot and you're not well practiced at it. And then that causes all kinds of consequences.
True. Can you, real quick, just because you have a lot of people spamming this before we get too deep into this, a lot of my people are saying that you have a weird echo on your stream.
I have a weird echo? Oh, yeah, you're right. Thank you. I don't know why that happened, but it should be fixed now.
Okay, cool. One of the things I was going to interject with earlier is that it's kind of one thing that do you mind saying how old are you real quick?
I'm 40.
Or you're 40. Okay, I'm 34. I never wanted to be this person, and I hate that I'm becoming this person, but I think I'm almost fully this person. Something I've gotten blackpilled on a lot of life development is I'm starting to see the world through the lens of age a lot more.
What do you mean?
And it's in that like a lot of the energy that I get from people, even from me earlier in my life, was like, oh my God, like I'm totally hearing you right now. You're like a 23-year-old male. And a lot of what you're saying is like filtered through that. It's funny that you talk about how like you're always addressing surface level issues and that you kind of get stuck in that sometimes. But if you look at like probably the advent of like human helping people, so like the Tony Robinsons or back in the days of fucking Rome and everything else, like when people are trying to help young men and everything, it's probably been like the same advice throughout all of human history, and it's not like it's ever been like solved, you know, like there hasn't been like this is the master key of like how to develop and how to live your life perfectly and how to figure all of your stuff out. We're still like, you know, thousands of years into human development, and it's like, how do I talk to a girl without feeling shame of rejection, or like what's an appropriate relationship to have with a parent that like I don't get along with? Like we have all of these fundamental questions that we're always dealing with through all of human history, and it just seems like a lot of it is kind of the thing where it's like, this is what you are, you're born as this person, and you kind of deal with these things as you get older. And sometimes I wonder if we've like progressed in terms of, or it's just like funny to observe that like we kind of have all the same issues that we've been struggling with, like all people since I guess the advent of like modern human civilization.
Yeah. So do you think we've made progress?
I don't think we focus on progress. I don't think we care about it too much. I think we should, but like I think that when you ask people like if we progressed as a society, usually the first things people bring up are like, well, medicine has gotten a lot better, technology has gotten a lot better, you know, our microchips, you know, the nanometer fabrication process, blah, blah, blah. But then if you ask somebody, well, what about progress in terms of like having healthy relationships or being able to resolve conflict with loved ones, or how many average friends do we have? Nobody ever marks progress that way. And since society doesn't keep track of it, and since there's not like a paycheck for it, I feel like sometimes, no, we don't actually care about it. I mean, it affects us, but we don't seem to care about it like we should, you know?
That's so interesting. So I kind of see why that's black-pilled, sort of. But, my sense is that we actually have solved a lot of those issues.
You think so?
Yeah.
Like what? Like what have we solved?
All
Dr.
of the
K?
things that you said. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but I think
go ahead, hit me.
This comes from maybe kind of a clinical perspective, but I think that, you know, when we're talking about solving issues on a societal level, I think one of the biggest things that we sort of miss out on is that human beings are individuals, right? And it's kind of like you can't, just because someone ate a meal 1,000 years ago doesn't mean that a human being born today won't be hungry. Like in terms of how to form healthy relationships, how to find purpose in life, I think we actually have a lot of really good solutions. It's almost like a biased way of thinking, where in the West we tend to focus on populations as our unit of study. So from a population level, have things gotten better? And this is where I think a lot of people will make arguments around medicine and stuff like that. But I mean, I think that you can look at, you know, Stoicism in the Roman era. You can look at stuff like yoga and meditation and enlightenment and Buddhism and all this kind of stuff. And I think even in terms of like forming healthy relationships, I think the progress is not on the human level, although I think there is progress at the human level. My experience has been that progress is actually like on the individual level. And so even
Gotcha. I guess when I was thinking of that, what I was more thinking of when I mentioned it through the lens of age is it feels like regardless of how much progress we've made as a society, there's a lot of stuff that you still have to like experience. And then once you've had those experiences, it seems really hard to shortcut the learning thing without having the negative experiences first. So when I think back to, I see this with a lot of young men online, and I see it with myself a lot. The idea that it's like you against the world as an early person. You don't care about connections. You don't care about networking. You don't care about bridges. You don't care about what people have done before. You're going to trailblaze your own way. And then through the experience of doing that and making mistakes, like eventually you kind of settle in and you're like, oh, wait, things are that way for a certain reason. And maybe it's better to kind of like understand how society works and like kind of, I could push a little bit, but like I need to have a better understanding of why things are the way they are. That like seems to be an early adventure for a lot of young men. And I don't know if there's like a way to shortcut that where it's like, hold on, wait, you don't have to make all these mistakes. Just read this and then you don't have to do this,
What's the value of shortcutting it?
Well, unfortunately today, the value is it's very hard to learn online because your mistakes are now immortalized in a tangible fixed medium, right? So like there are a lot of like if I would have had the same growth, I think I'm a pretty good person. I think I've become a really good person. But if I would have had that same growth 10 years, if I would have had that same growth 10 years later, I would have never gotten to this point because I would have been destroyed making mistakes. The mistakes that I made 10 years ago would have been enough to like be immortalized, and that would be it. That'd be my whole character. I think we're very much judged by our worst moments online as like public figures at least, or even as like quasi-public figures. If you have social media, you just are unlucky and your particular post gets blown up. It's really hard to have those learning experiences.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, but I think in a sense, I think I sort of agree with you, but I kind of have a different kind of take on it. So first of all, I think that's the way it is. Yeah. Like I think there's something fundamental about being an individual human. And the other thing that I don't know if this is going to make a whole lot of sense is that I think it doesn't matter how many mistakes you shortcut. There's going to be a barrier that you're going to make mistakes and have to overcome.
For sure.
Right? And like if 23-year-old Destiny was alive and as a content creator today, you would get canceled so hard that you would never be, and I get that. But I think that's where like I personally like some of these lenses like Karma to sort of think through that because I think it helps me make sense of things from a narrative perspective. But the cool thing is that as a result of that, you are able to do something unique today that no one else can do, which is you can sit here as a 34-year-old, learn those lessons, and then pass that along to other people.
Yeah. I try to,
And I think that this is where I'm with you that generally speaking, we think about shortcuts or bypassing some kind of pain as like a good thing. But I think no matter how many shortcuts you take, you're going to hit some kind of barrier. Sure. And then at that point, there's going to be some amount of suffering or mistakes or whatever. And that's where, like, I think at the end of the day, the way to live life is just how do I manage being imperfect when the world expects success and perfection and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I 1,000,000% agree. Like, I wouldn't trade my experiences for the world because I think that there have been some things that have been granted to me through experience that are so invaluable. And I don't know if listening to other people without living that would have given me the same type of perspective. So, it's funny because it reminds me of like, I know that growing up, I had like, my parents were kind of helicoptery, like they were always like, don't do that, don't eat that, don't blah, blah, blah. Thankfully, they were busy doing other shit, so I could do crazy stuff. But then as I got older, I would always hear about crazy stuff that they did as kids. And I'm like, man, you guys are doing some wild stuff. Do you prefer if I swear or don't swear on this? I'm sorry, Okay, I got you. They were doing wild shit as kids, and I hear about all these crazy stories about him crashing, his dad's motorcycle, and my mom, running away at like 18 to join the Air Force Academy, and like all these like crazy things. I'm like, oh my god! And then as I grow up, I see like all the crazy things that I did, and I'm like, Jesus. And then even like when I'm recounting some of these stories to friends, and we're like talking to each other, I'm like, this is fucking wild. Like if my son was doing this, I would kill him. Like what? Like what am I even doing? But it's so much different now because Now it's like it almost feels like there's, I don't know if it's like a collective delusion, but we all kind of like look at each other and we're like, we didn't do anything too crazy. But now that kids have like a camera and a phone in front of every single thing, now it's like, oh my God, he did that thing. It's so horrible. And it's like, yeah, kind of. But I mean, like, didn't we all kind of do like really crazy, stupid things? You know, like I had I had a thing. I think it was like, I want to say it was about a year ago, where these two people were writing a kind of like a Me Too thing, trying to take out some dude, and it was like a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, and I was like, oh my God, like, what do you guys like? And it was because of like messages they'd exchanged. There wasn't even anything sexual. And I'm just like reading this and I'm like, you guys are writing like Word docs on each other in high school. What's happening right now? Like, and oh my God, it's just, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it seems insane. This is going to tie into our mental health stuff because I think social media is a huge part of what is like ruining our minds today. But like, yeah, geez.
Yeah, dude, that's a lot. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. Do you think that the scale of mistakes that your parents made versus what you made versus what your kids are going to make, do you think that scale has changed?
I think that there is I think there's like have you ever heard of the term Overton window?
Mm-mm.
It's like it's used to express like how like what is the range of acceptable political beliefs in a country, right? So the further right you are, you'd say the Overton window goes over here. The further left you are, it goes over here. I feel like there's like an Overton window of like mistakes, and it feels like it's gotten narrower and narrower and narrower to where like when I think of the types of mistakes like my grandparents made, it might be like they tried cocaine when they were 17, or they were like in my grandpa was in Vietnam. And then when I think of the mistakes my parents made, it was like they crashed a car while drunk driving at 19. And then I think of mistakes that I made, it was like trying to get a friend to push my car with his car to like a repair shop. And then when I think of the mistakes that like kids today make, it's like you looked at like an Andrew Tate video on your TikTok in class. And it feels like the range of mistakes is getting narrower and narrower, which I think probably doesn't accurately account for the totality of like human experiences. Like you want to have like this range, but it feels like the acceptable range of behaviors has gotten a lot narrower, and there's less room for mistakes. That's what it feels like, Not to say, and when I say these things also as a real thing, I'm not excusing those things or saying it's okay. But like, so for instance, when I hear like there was a really big thing I think that in getting Andrew Tate banned was a teacher saying little boys are making fun of little girls in class because of Andrew Tate stuff. And I see that and I think little boys shouldn't be making fun of little girls. That's wrong. But little boys, when I grew up, always made fun of little girls, and you're not supposed to, and you get in trouble for it. But then like we see that, and I think people are like, oh my God, is this like a new thing? I'm like, well, no, probably not. Like I went to grade school, we all made fun of each other and said horrible, deplorable things about each other. But it's like part of like growing up and learning what you can and can't do,
Yeah. So I love talking to you, man.
Sure.
So I would agree that I think society as a whole is becoming less tolerant. So I've noticed something that I think is related to a lot of the mental health problems that we have today, which maybe is a hot take or unpopular opinion. But one thing that I'm noticing, and this maybe has to do with some of the yoga training and stuff like that, is that I've noticed that even in the window of my clinical practice, so I probably saw my first patient in 2010, 2011 as a medical student. And in the last 13 years, what I've noticed is that we as a society are ceding control of our mental well-being to other people.
Oh.
And what I'm noticing is that if something upsets me, the default position when I was growing up was how to take care of yourself, how to defend yourself. Whereas now I think what we're seeing more and more of is if something is hurtful to me, that person needs to stop. Which I'm also with you that I don't think that there are good reasons to impose boundaries on people who are abusive and stuff like that. And I think that's like a big thing that I work on with patients and stuff like that. But I think in general, it's kind of interesting because what we've almost done is when we sort of say, okay, like you need to stop saying these things because I find them hurtful. What we're actually doing is giving that person power over our internal tranquility. Sure. And even like as a formal part of our training as psychiatrists is to acknowledge that, okay, if you're dealing with someone who says something that hurts you, that could be a consequence of, let's say, them being high on K2 or in the midst of a manic episode. So we literally train ourselves to be somewhat resistant to toxicity. Like it's a part of the job. And what I'm noticing is that skill is useful for all human beings. How can I be secure in who I am? How can I develop self-esteem to where if someone says something negative about me, there can be things that they're saying that are toxic and abusive and they need to be held accountable for. But just because they need to be held accountable, there's a gap between that and how much I am able to be sort of protected or defended against that toxicity. And society is definitely moving in the direction of, if someone is doing something wrong, we need to get them to stop it, as opposed to I need to be better at handling it.
Yeah, there's this ties in, I think, really well. I was just on a podcast with a guy called Chris Williamson. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah, I was on this podcast recently too.
Okay, awesome, cool. Okay, yeah.
Cool.
We
Dude.
just had a talk, and I talk about one of the challenges of, there are two concepts that I try to marry personally, and then when I talk to other people. And these two concepts are, one is the analysis of classes and people at a societal level, and then two is the analysis of an individual. When I'm giving prescriptions, or if I'm talking about like, what do we need to change in society, you know, it's going to be things like what kind of government aid is available, what kind of programs are available to help children stay out of trouble, you know, what kind, it's like class-based things for large groups of people, because that's at the societal level, that's all we can really analyze. You know, I can't give you a different prescription for 340 million people. But when I talk to an individual, my advice is going to come off as like, I'm the most libertarian, anarcho-capitalist person ever. My advice is going to be, figure out what you need to do. You're the only one that cares about yourself as much as you do. You can advocate for yourself better than anybody else can. And you know yourself better than anybody else, and you have to figure out what you can do to make the most of like any bad situation. And it seems really difficult for people to marry either of these points without getting totally lost down one side. To tie in, I thank God I can make these analogies with you because you're the gamer guy. In League of Legends, okay, which I think unfortunately you have personal experience with, right? Or did you play Dota?
Yeah, but I played League.
Okay, sure. All right. It's all the same toxic, horrible stuff, okay? In League of Legends, okay, one of the worst and most horrible things you can do when you get into a game and you're losing is to always blame your teammates, right? You can't give up all of your agency to your teammates. Even if it was the case that it was an unwinnable game, what a good player will tell you is they'll say, listen, even in case of unwinnable games, just control what you can, right? If your team is losing, you know, try not to die as much. If your partner in lane sucks, try to CS well and, you know, don't get ganked. You know, if you're a carry, you know, try to at least have a positive KDA, right? You try to control what you can, because that at the end of the day, that's all you can do. And we know that for games, if you blame your teammates constantly, of course, you're never going to improve as a player. But then we step off the rift, and then we come into real life, and there's value in analyzing things as being white supremacist or as being patriarchal. But like, if you inundate somebody throughout their entire life with this idea that everybody's racist against you, everybody's sexist against you, everybody's bigoted against you, if you lose out on opportunities because of your skin color, it's because of your race, because of your background, it's because of your class, how are you not destroying that person's ability to develop any sort of tenacity to deal with adversity in the world, or to take responsibility and fight against things, even if it is unfair? You know, because I think that once you put a person in that mindset, you know, they're going to spend their entire life thinking like, well, why didn't I get a gank? Well, why didn't my support do this? Well, why didn't I get hired for that job? Well, why didn't the teacher give me the same grade as him? Well, why is my carry always right? You end up like blaming everything around you. Yeah, and that trying to marry those two concepts together is really, really, really difficult for most people. And then when I start giving advice on one under the other, people always attack me on their side. I was like, listen, free meals for kids in schools is a no-brainer in the United States. And people say, oh, you don't think parents should take any responsibility for their kids? Like, I never said that. Or if I say things like, yeah, if you're a parent and you got to work 2 jobs to take care of your kids, work 2 jobs. And I'm like, oh, so you don't think food stamps are okay? And I was like, well, no, of course they are. But like, it's such a frustrating thing to deal on both ends of that issue, because people have such a hard time dealing and marrying both those concepts. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think my experience has been a little bit different. Just, I think this may have to do with the nature of interactions that we have. But you know, there's a really interesting, I think, marriage of that we sort of do routinely in psychiatry, which is mental illness is not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yep. Right. So this is where kind of the acknowledgement, and this is so hard, and it's so challenging, because sometimes what'll happen is I'll have, you know, a patient who's in a relationship, and the patient may have, let's say something like bipolar disorder, or something that's a little bit more on the severe end, where the bipolar disorder does make the relationship objectively harder. There are factors outside of individual control that stack the deck against you. And at the same time, just because you have bipolar disorder or you have an addiction or something like that, there are some things that are stacked against you. But what I find is that the people who ultimately get healthy are the ones who are able to acknowledge that the deck is stacked against me, and also that I have some degree of control. Because I think what we sort of do when we say societally, like there's all kinds of discrimination, and call it whatever you want to, that exists, that's real. And at the same time, as an individual, you have to live within this world. And as you kind of said, I don't know that society is looking out for you. So the sad thing is that you have to kind of look out for yourself. And I think there's a really important kind of like grieving process and stuff like that, acceptance process, where I've worked with people who have been, just filled with regret that the deck was not stacked in their favor, or that there are people who get, the deck stacked in their favor in particular ways. And I've seen people who kind of stay stuck there, and they're the ones that don't accept. And I've seen people who are able to accept and sort of acknowledge that, okay, even though it's not fair that I ended up with bipolar disorder, it's not my fault, there's a genetic predisposition. At the same time, if I want to live the kind of life that I want to live, I have to take some responsibility over it. And usually, so I would almost say that my day job is oftentimes trying to get people to like marry those two concepts. Yeah. Which is really hard because people tend to think in terms of black and white. And I tend to find that it's hard to get people to accept personal responsibility when they are filled with negative emotion.
For sure. Yeah.
And so usually there's a sequence of decompressing emotion leading to acceptance, and then you can start moving forward.
Yeah. That's like that's a debate strategy. It's a relationship strategy. It's probably a therapist strategy that if somebody's in a compromised state of mind, you're past the point of ever getting them to agree with you. I can't do it. I'm even aware of it, and I can't do it. If I'm heated, I know I'm not going to listen to reason. And I'll usually say, like, listen, let's reconnect, or let's talk about TV shows or something. Because like, if I'm heated right now, you can tell me 2 + 2 = 4, and I'm going to die on the hill that it's 5, One of the, do you know who Brittany Simon is, a YouTuber?
Nope.
Oh, okay. She does like kind of like life coaching stuff sometimes. She's the only person I've met who is such a rare thing. I'll hear people say things like, "I can't do this because of my ADHD," or I've got borderline, so I can't do this." She's one of the only people I've heard say, "I have this thing, and because of that, I do this to like alleviate it," or "because of that, I do this." I like it when people like have a recognition of like, like instead of saying like I have ADHD, I can't do that, someone will say like, "Oh, I have ADHD, so if I'm gonna do that, I need to make sure that like I don't have a computer next to me, or I need to leave my phone in the other room," right? It's that like you recognize that you have some mental thing going on, and then because you recognize it, like a medical diagnosis, you don't just use that as an excuse to do nothing. You use that as like a path forward to like, because I have this thing, I'm gonna change my behavior accordingly.
Yeah, so I think that that's great in theory. And I advocate for that as well. But I think there's an element there that I personally think could be missing in some of those cases. So especially if you look at something like ADHD, the reason people say I have ADHD, therefore I can't do it, is not actually a shortcoming on their part. It's actually a learned behavior. So when you have ADHD, and you exist within a system that assumes neurotypical kids, you discover very quickly, like this is a truth, that ADHD makes things impossible for me. That's a lesson. So if you look at this, there's really interesting research. If you look at a comorbid population of people who have depression and ADHD, so if we take the subset of people who have both diagnoses, if you get diagnosed with depression first, you have a 3% chance of developing ADHD. Okay? If you get diagnosed with ADHD first, you have a 70% chance of developing depression. So there are studies that show that by the 2nd grade, the majority of kids with ADHD will not get invited to a single birthday party. Jeez. So what happens with these kids is that they go to school and they recognize that I am just as smart as my friends, but they're not able to perform in school in a way that is anywhere near them. And so what tends to happen is that people will sort of discover this truth that, and this is almost protective, right? Because if I have ADHD and I pretend like I don't, I'm just going to get burned. And so oddly enough, the helplessness, and there's a ton of research on this, I think that helplessness comes out of that. And I think if someone is saying, I have ADHD, therefore I do it this way, that person has had a life in which they were able to learn, or someone supported them in learning. And this is the really wild thing about ADHD, is that those people who feel they're helpless, I think it's completely correct and completely wrong. because once they're given, because you can't figure it out, or very few people are able to figure it out on their own. When there's a system that is aligned with one way and you don't fit into it, like, it's really hard to figure that out. You have to be incredibly resilient, incredibly lucky, have someone who really like shows you the way. And then usually what we tend to find is that if you actually do like psychotherapy for people with ADHD, they can get substantially better and even be in remission. The interesting thing is they're not really in remission. Their ADHD is completely active and is actually sort of the same. They've just learned all the compensatory mechanisms to which they have no more impairment of function or are completely functional within society. So I'm with you that, you know, I think that having bipolar disorder or having ADHD or any kind of, you know, addiction or trauma or whatever necessitates a different strategy of how to live your life. And I even go as far as to say that you don't even need a mental illness for that. I think that every human being has a unique cognitive fingerprint, and success and happiness in life is in figuring out, okay, what is my unique cognitive fingerprint and how do I play this game of life?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the phrases or the term stress versus eustress?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like that. It's the idea that it took me a long time to figure out why stress was such a motivating factor for me. But it's always because I feel like when I'm confronted with a stressful thing, it's like a challenge, and I feel like I've got the tools to overcome it for whatever reason. So these things end up becoming, like an impetus for me to either improve or succeed. But for a lot of people that feel like they don't have those tools, those types of stressful things just become kind of a horrifying pit of despair that they feel like they can't do anything about, and they just kind of like, put their head down, and they have no way to like work their way through it.
Yeah, there's a really great expression. I forget who the psychiatrist is who kind of developed this concept, but he talks about active challenges versus passive challenges and how that relates to eustress versus distress. So just to kind of take a step back, we sort of know, if you look at like scientific studies of the flow state, if the challenges that you face are too easy, you will get bored and your performance will drop. If the challenges that you face are overwhelming, you will get overwhelmed. So at the top end of the challenge curve and at the bottom end of the challenge curve, both of those cause a decrease in performance. And in that middle zone, that is the zone of eustress, where you're kind of challenged sufficiently to where you actually perform the best. The really interesting thing is that what oftentimes overwhelms people is when the challenges that they face are not challenges that they choose. So an active challenge is something that you choose to engage in, which is difficult. A passive challenge is something that is thrust upon you, which is difficult. And when your life is one where passive challenges outweigh active challenges, it tends to lead to feeling overwhelmed and like stopping action. It's very hard to motivate yourself. You're kind of getting bodied by life. Whereas, so it's really interesting, but one sort of solution to anxiety or feeling overwhelmed in life is to actually challenge yourself more. And then there's really an interesting equation where once active challenges outweigh passive challenges, once the hard things that you do in life, are more based on your choice, the more motivated and successful you become.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, I guess, when I compare like your life as a streamer or YouTuber compared to your life working like at McDonald's. Like technically my life now is way harder than the service jobs that I worked in the past, but like the difficulties are welcome, right? I would rather be thinking of like, what are the 15 different challenges I've got today on stream, rather than like the more simple and arguably less challenging life of like, today's my 700th day, working at McDonald's or a carpet cleaning job or a casino service job or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of bizarre, but, I'm very lucky to have the job that I have today. And people usually talk about medical residency as like a very, very difficult period because you're working a lot of hours and you're kind of at the bottom of the totem pole and things like that. But I find it's really bizarre, but I really think that in some ways my job today, and this may get me canceled, is in a lot of ways like much harder than it is in residency. And I think there are just some things about being responsible where the nice thing, at least about residency, or things that are objectively more difficult, is that we had certain safety nets, which I feel like we don't have, right? So when you're by yourself, kind of like you're sort of alluding to, if you screw up, there's no one there to pick you up, and consequences are consequences, and there's no safety net. And so I'm with you 100% that, and this is what we see in residency as well, which is why like people are so burnt out, is because they have tons of passive challenges. They have all these things that they have to do that are completely out of their control.
Yeah.
And since shit rolls downhill, people in residency are super burnt out because they're the ones that have to deal with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So
I don't
you
think I
were,
have anything on that. Yeah. Where do you want to go?
I think you'd said something was going to relate to. Well, I'm a little bit curious. Let's talk about. You said something about as you're older, you've gotten a bit black pilled. Can you tell me what you mean by that? I wasn't quite sure.
It was like a half ironic statement.
Yeah,
What I'm
yeah.
saying is just that like it feels like there is. I hate this because there's still like a younger 20-year-old guy in me that's screaming not to be a sellout loser. But it feels like as you get older, there really are a lot of things that you learn with age in terms of like your temperament changes, the importance of, I guess, synergizing with the social systems around you becomes more apparent. And there's kind of this like, especially me as a streamer, especially on the forefront of whatever the hell it is I do. There's like this balance of like how much am I trying to push against societal norms versus how much am I trying to appeal to societal norms, and like what's the correct balance of that. And then what is like, am I making a worthy decision that is like resembling some inner value system I have, or am I just doing something because I'm like being lazy or spiteful, or like it's very, very, very hard to sort. And then while you're doing all of this, there's not like a blueprint, right? There's not like this is how you become a influential, successful, because it's like it's not a thing very many people do. And I imagine even for individuals in their lives, it's always hard to figure out like how much is being true to yourself versus what's being a sellout. You know, how much do you want to keep it real versus how much do you want to suck it up and whatever. Yeah, that's just like it's a process that I'm finding more and more as you get older. Like when I talk to other people that are 30 plus, I'm like, okay, we're on the same page for this. And then when I talk to a lot of people that are like 22, 23, I'm like, okay, I understand what you're saying and I'm hearing you, and I don't think I can communicate with you right now, but I think in like 10 years, you're going to come back to this conversation and go, oh shit, I should have realized this thing. It feels like age is like a pretty important thing, and like getting enough experience and maturing you in certain ways is what I'm saying. Yeah.
What kinds of things would you, in this kind of hypothetical, I'm just curious, what kind of thing would you hear from, let's say, a 23-year-old that you think that they wouldn't be able to listen to what you're saying?
I feel like when you're younger, I feel like there's a goal to reinvent the wheel on everything. So it might be simple right now that you hear a lot from certain communities, for instance, that like college is a horrible idea. Don't go to school. That's for losers. Work on e-commerce and drop shipping. And I think it's attractive because it's like the internet is still kind of new. Like I can carve my own way. Like school is for losers. It's a lot of debt. And then maybe, over some time, you realize like, okay, well, maybe I should have spent some time building a reliable skill that's marketable that I can get paid for. And maybe this was a mistake and I didn't realize it. And there was a reason why, the median earnings for somebody with a 4-year degree are $20,000 a year higher than the median earnings for someone with only a high school degree. And I just didn't really realize it at the time because I felt like I was ready to fight the world and everything was dumb the way that it was said before. So like maybe feelings of college might be one thing. Maybe approach to relationships might be another thing. Some people early on can have standards that are way too high for relationships. I'm going to find a guy or a girl that only does exactly what I want them to do, and I'm not going to accept anything less than that. Sometimes people's standards are way too low. I've had a lot of abusive partners, but maybe it's my fault because of the way that I am, and I just kind of like, my parents weren't nice to me, and, this guy's not nice to me. It's just life, right? So like balancing out those things. So school, relationships, professional courtesy, like how we treat bosses and coworkers. Like I do better work than them, so I don't care if I treat my coworkers like shit. I'm better than them. Who cares? Versus getting older, and you're like, okay, well, regardless of how I feel about my coworkers, I see them every day, and my boss is going to see how I treat coworkers, and how I work with people might be the determining factor on if I get a raise or a promotion, not how well I do my job. Those are like 3 things I guess you kind of like learn. We can focus in on any area you want, but like, yeah, there's like a lot of things that as you get older, you're like, oh, okay, I understand why this is why it is, and I wish I would have learned this a little bit earlier, but you kind of realize as you get older, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that all sounds like learning the lessons of life and growing up.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm thinking is I wish it was like, oh, cool, I'm 20. Can I just like absorb this knowledge from somebody so I don't have to be a dick to my coworkers, be in shitty relationships, and, do stupid things with school. Like, it's so funny. Like I tell people, and I think most other successful people, real successful people, not crypto millionaires, most other successful people I talk to realize this. Like it's such a stupid, like almost throwaway piece of advice. But like if I could impart one piece of wisdom onto myself as a younger person, just one thing that I can change my whole life, just spend 30 minutes a day more studying. That's it. Just the one thing. Probably would have changed my whole life. Well, probably in the worst because I got lucky. But like I would have done so much better in school, so much better in college, so much better like professionally. For just 30 minutes a day studying in school. Like that would be like one super simple thing. But it feels like it took me a lot of life experience to learn something like that,
I'm tempted to ask you a personal question.
Go knock us out, whatever you want.
I mean, I'm just curious about how you're thinking about this thing, and I'm wondering like, are you terrified that you're going to have to, 40-year-old Steven or 45-year-old Steven is going to be looking back and thinking, oh, like, what are the mistakes that I made now?
Yeah, kind of, but like this is one of those balancing acts. So on one sense, people ask me sometimes, my fans will be like, "Oh, like you should write a book on something." And it's like, why would I put anything I believe right now onto paper when in 3 years I'm probably going to think whatever I think now is, stupid. So in one sense, yeah, I kind of think about that. But then in another sense, I would think if I looked back 5 years from now and I was the exact same person, I'd be worried that I'd stop growing. That would be a concern of mine. So the way that I try to think right now is I only want to take a strong position on something that I feel incredibly grounded in. And for everything else, I just want to leave myself open to change. So there are like, I think there are like 4 or 5 like things politically where it's like, these are things that are true and I'm probably never going to move off these, and I never have. But for everything else, I try not to be so married. Like I'll try to caveat, even if I feel like, socialized medicine is very important in the United States. We need this, unless there's studies showing otherwise, right? I try to keep my mind open, so I'm like open to change in the future. Yeah.
But what's the doubt? I mean, so it sounds like you're reluctant to write a book because something will be set in stone.
I feel like a lot of people, when I see, so I've existed on the internet for like 13 years now. And I think part of my continued success is that I'm able to kind of like adapt and change as like society and time goes on, while still holding on to something that is important or something that makes me me. I'm not just like new area, totally new person, but there's still like that core thing of me there. And then there's moving through time. Something that gets scary for me is I'll see, especially because I do political stuff, right? I'll see political figures that have been in like if you joined a political org and then you've got a stake in that political org and then you start doing content with that political org, it feels like you've robbed yourself of the ability to grow, right? Like let's say tomorrow, Ben Shapiro wakes up and he has an epiphany and he's like, you know what? I actually think that government entitlement programs and welfare are probably one of the most important things in the United States. Could he even say that publicly? It would probably destroy him to do it. Would he even be able to feel that? There's probably some degree of ideological and audience capture going on where it's like, well, I'm a conservative. I don't know if I should think that. This is probably wrong. I'm stupid. And like my audience is going to hate me for it. So yeah, that's something that I see some people who will like, I am the socialist, I am the capitalist, I am the libertarian. And then they get so locked into that phase that they've robbed themselves of even have the opportunity to grow or change as they get older.
Politics is not my area of expertise, but I'm really curious. So I heard about this tweet that Ann Coulter did where she was like talking about abortion rights or something. I don't even know the details. It's like third hand. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, but I've probably seen it if it's Ann Coulter and it's about abortion.
What do you think it says?
Well, I mean, she was the original staunch, like lady, kind of like asshole conservative lady. So I imagine for a long period of life, she was ultra super against it. Has that opinion changed recently, or?
Yeah.
I'm Googling this now to see what it is. Sorry, I don't know why I'm Googling it. You could just tell me. Yeah.
I don't know the details of what she said, but she was talking about how like this is like where the restriction of abortion rights in America has like gone too far or something. I don't know what
Oh, I just saw this on April 5th. She said, "Please stop pushing strict limits on abortion, or there will be no Republicans left." Is it this tweet?
Yeah.
You think?
Probably.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely true. I've always said that I think that there are 2 big issues that the political parties have right now where if they could just loosen up on them, they would get a whole bunch of followers. For Republicans, I feel like they need to drop the ultra strict abortion thing and just concede that like abortion from like first trimester at least is okay. And it would just open their base up so much. And for Democrats, it's the obsession over guns. They just need to like leave the AR-15s alone. They're very sparingly used in shootings, and it would open them up to a whole bunch of like new people. But those are like 2 issues that both sides are really dug in on, and they lose, I think, a lot of political capital over both of them. Yeah. But the abortion thing is a really big one for Republicans, and it like motivates the hell out of Democrats to go out to the polls and vote.
And so, what do you think about her kind of saying her more recent tweet?
Well, I mean, that just sounded like political strategy to me. I don't know if that was like reflecting like personal growth, you know?
Well, so because what I'm kind of curious about is why do you think that political parties can't grow, right? Because you're sort of saying if you join, let's say, like a politically oriented content creation engine, that sort of staunches your growth. Whereas one of the things that I've been super curious about is like, why can't people change their minds? Like we talk about changing your mind as a politician is the biggest sin that you can commit. Why do you think that is?
I feel like people, this is something that I try to keep in mind. I'm going to play a little bit of a language game here, but it captures an idea. I am a person that likes capitalism, but I'm not like a capitalist. Or I might be a person that plays PC games, but I'm not a PC gamer. I think that people will take the ideas, and rather than them having a strong identity that like connects to these ideas, those ideas are kind of absorbed into the identity and they become part of the identity. And when something is part of your identity, it becomes very, very, very hard to change that without feeling really bad about yourself. I tend to believe that people have almost completely binary opinions of themselves. Like you're either completely good or completely bad. It's very hard to accept any fault in yourself without it having a lot of cognitive dissonance. I think that's where things like health at every size comes from, right? Like I can't like love myself if I also accept that there's like an issue with my weight. So the weight thing actually isn't a big deal at all, you know? And I think with politics, I think it's similar where you're not just like a person who is a Republican. You are a Republican. That is who you are. You don't just have Republican ideas. You are this thing. And so to change your mind on it becomes very, very, very difficult because it's like recognizing and then expelling a fault within yourself. I think that's my feeling on it.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, the only thing I would add to that is that I think that quality is actually quite fluctuant. So if you look at, this is more from Eastern psychology, but the more black and white and identified with a particular quality you are, correlates with the amount of emotion that you feel, especially negative emotion.
Okay.
So even if you ask people of diehard political parties, if you can engage them in a calm discussion, or anyone who has strongly held beliefs, this has been my experience anyway, that if you can engage them in a calm discussion, they themselves, so this is like literally what we do in addiction psychiatry and motivational interviewing, is you've got someone who's in denial. I'm not an alcoholic. So this is an ego thing. You know, they don't think about alcohol addiction as a disease or whatever. They say, I am not a alcoholic. Sure. So there's an aspect of ego that arises, and this is the identification that you're talking about. And the really interesting thing about ego is ego arises anytime you have negative emotion as a defensive mechanism to protect you from pain. So when someone says, hey, you just wrecked our car, or you were driving with the kids drunk, they could have died. That thought is painful, and thus the ego arises and tries to protect you from it by denying. The really interesting thing about disarming that is that if you can remove the negative emotion from the equation, people are actually able to admit their mistakes. And one of the things that I'm just, noticing is that in our current society, if you make a mistake, anyone who disagrees with you, and this is kind of what you were saying about, you can't get away with what you did 10 years ago. If you make a single mistake, like we don't let people make mistakes anymore. We just, I think that
crucify them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't ever admit that you were wrong.
Yeah. Real quick, it's so funny. Something that you said about this, I'm sure a lot of the therapy techniques, everything you learn can probably be, you can probably find them in police interrogations too. Do you ever watch any of these interrogation videos?
I've seen some of these, yeah.
That thing you just said about removing negative emotion to get somebody to kind of admit a mistake, it's a very important interrogation tactic. If you've got a criminal that's done something bad in an interrogation, you're not going to sit there and say, didn't you kill him? Didn't you kill him? Didn't you kill him? Usually as their interrogator, you're going to try to build up a lot of like, they were really unfair to you, weren't they? Like, you probably wanted to hit that guy because like, who wouldn't? Like anybody would want to hit him in that circumstance. Like he was totally unfair for you. Like I would probably attack him, right? You're removing the negative emotion related to like, or rather like the judgment from them admitting something bad. And it's like, you're kind of like building a rapport with them there. And then it gets people more freely in those interrogation rooms to admit their mistakes. It's just funny that you said it that way, because I remember in the videos where a cop will do that and then the person will start volunteering information because they don't feel like there's like any negative judgment there anymore. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's about building an alliance is the broader idea of what we would talk about, And I saw there was a video recently where there's someone who's being reviled by the internet because they were in a DUI. And people are just stunned by the level of denial. And it's like, well, when you're accusatory and stuff like that, people are just going to do weird psychological stuff. But
yeah, I wish it's so hard. Are you talking about the woman that was in the room or something different?
I'm not sure, but I tend not to comment on specific people. I just noticed this thing.
Yeah. Something that I try to get people to understand this all the time. Even when I'm arguing with people and I hang up a call and my chat will be like, oh, why are they so stupid? Why didn't they just admit they were wrong? Blah, blah, blah. really, really hard to admit fault in the middle of a thing. Like I tell people like I'm probably not going to do it, and I don't expect anybody to do it. Usually if I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm just there to kind of like plant the seeds, but it's very, very, very rare, and it takes an exceptional human to be like, you know what, I think I was wrong in this circumstance. Generally people need to cool off, and then hopefully whatever words you left them with will start to like take hold, and then like there's like a quiet admission later, and then at some point maybe like, yeah, I think you were right about this, you know. But getting people to change their mind in the heat of the moment is almost impossible, and nobody ever seems to recognize that, even though we all have that problem. Every human being has that problem, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I I think we sort of understand that in the clinical world pretty well, right? Even when we've got, and I just wonder a little bit about just the antagonistic relationships of especially like politics, where it's like people are just so at each other's throats. There's something that I have just this instinct. I have no idea if this is right or wrong, and this could be the height of Dunning-Kruger, but that, you know, if you kind of get people to sit down and like just have a frank discussion with them, where first of all you try to understand their view, which I think is something that's very, very missing in today's society. We all try to convince. Even then, if you sort of think about it, like we talk about something you're good at, right? Debates. Debates are sort of the default way of discussing different views. And there's this idea that even in that frame, there is a winner and a loser. That people don't, I mean, I guess this is hopefully a good example. I don't think I'm debating you about anything, but I think I don't think people of differing views sit down and like have discussions for the purpose of like learning something together or even trying to understand the other side. It's about, I'm going to poke holes in this other person's argument because I'm right and they're wrong. As opposed to, hey, this person believes something drastically different from what I do. Maybe I need to learn something because this really makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, I super agree. One of the things that I kind of push for a lot in conversations is like to just understand why a person feels the way they do. There's like one truth that I've kind of like stumbled upon that I feel very strongly about. I don't think I'll ever change my mind on it, is people's feelings sometimes can be very irrational, but people's feelings are never, ever, ever random. Like they always feel something for a reason. And I think it's important to figure out why they feel the way they do, right? Somebody might be incredibly racist or incredibly sexist or incredibly whatever. And it might be like, even the way they like, well, I think that anytime I run into this type of person, it's going to be in trouble. It's like, that's not a rational belief. That's not true. Like the data, the stats, blah, blah, blah. But it's important to recognize, well, why do you feel that way? Because that feeling didn't come from nowhere. So it's either the type of media they're consuming, it's some experiences they've had, it's things they've been told by family or friends. And it's really important to identify that particular thing to understand why that person feels that way. Because a lot of people go into some of these conversations assuming like, oh, well, the reason why we disagree is obviously because this guy is evil. And it's like, well, no, I mean, he's probably not evil. There's probably a reason why he disagrees with you, you know?
So I'm a little bit confused. Why do you say that emotions are irrational?
I'm sorry. When I'm saying rational, I mean like in the like, let's say somebody says that there's a minority that they see on TV, so they think, well, anytime I run into that person, I'm probably going to get robbed. We would say that like that's in a way that's like irrational because statistically speaking, this is probably not going to happen. The feeling itself, I guess, isn't irrational because it's built on some particular thing. But like the way that belief manifests in the world, like the outcome that you think is going to happen, that's not very rational. Yeah. But the feeling is there for a reason. It's important to identify why the feeling is there.
Yeah. So I mean, I would kind of, I think we're saying the same thing, but I think it's a little bit more semantics. But I think even for what you just said, if there's a reason for them to feel that way, which can be deduced, right? That implies that there is rationality behind it. And that's like literally what we sort of know, is that if people are experiencing an emotion, if you even look at something like a trauma response, which is the textbook definition of an irrational response. So if I hear a door slam, I believe I am in danger and that someone is trying to hurt me. But that's not, you may look at that from an objective standpoint and say that is irrational, but actually like what we sort of know clinically is that this is actually a completely rational belief. It has to do with the way that our brain processes information and the way that it attaches certain associations to particular stimuli. And even when it comes to things like racism and stuff like that, there's a really good test, which I think is publicly available, some kind of perception test out of a laboratory at Harvard that essentially measures how racist you are. And
so you're talking about the implicit bias test?
Yeah, maybe it's an implicit bias test. And the really interesting thing is that, you know, even people of ethnic minorities are racist towards ethnic minorities because it's some of the way that we're conditioned.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So you made a comment about social media earlier and how it's ruining stuff.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about that? What do you think is going on?
This gets into a lot of woo-woo territory, but
Great.
yeah. I imagine not your kind of Ayurvedic woo-woo, okay? No, I'm just kidding. No, yeah, when I say woo-woo, what I mean is like I don't think I have like a study to publish or anything. But I feel like I feel like human beings, the way that we socialize, there's probably a whole lot of evolutionary stuff that goes into that, like genetically, biologically, and then how we're conditioned socially and everything. And I think that social media is doing things, it's like plugging into that system and it's abusing it in a whole bunch of different ways. And it's probably destroying the way that our minds are developed to socialize with people. Maybe, so like, yeah, I can expand more on some part of that if you want to dive into anything more of that.
Yeah, so I'd like to play a fun game.
Go for it.
How about you tell me what woo you believe? You don't need the studies. I'll give you the studies.
Sure.
So what do you think is going on? Because I think you're spot on. This is
sure.
What I like
yeah, I think there's a lot of things going on. I think that the pressure for appearance is obviously detrimental to teenage girls, especially. But you're seeing so many images now telling you what you're supposed to look like, and social media has allowed us to. Social media and cosmetic surgery has like ramped this up to levels that previously were thought impossible. Like before, it was just you're competing with like girls with a lot of makeup. Okay, fine. Now you're competing with girls with a lot of makeup and Pamela Anderson's with like, you know, big boobs and fake surgery and whatever. Okay. And now you're competing with like people on Instagram that are using Facetune for perfect skin, that even on videos have live filters, that are also getting a lot of cosmetic surgery, that are also wearing a ton of makeup. And at this point, like I don't think anybody even knows, like, it's especially true for women. I think men are going to start to get there, but it's especially true for women. I don't think people know what a real woman even looks like anymore. Like the default has been so out of even women. I don't know if know what like real women look like anymore, because the social media, you are inundated with 1 billion images a day for what a woman is supposed to look like, and almost none of it is real.
Yeah, so I would agree with you, and here's the research, and I think it's even worse than what you think. So let's understand a couple things. Body dysmorphia is, there used to be a gender difference between women and men in body dysmorphia. That difference is shrinking. And I even think that, so if you look at incels, for example, there's a subset of incels that will really focus on actually body dysmorphia. So they'll focus on jawline or some physical feature, and they'll say, because of this, all of my problems are there. So I wonder actually whether incels are a modern manifestation of body dysmorphia. So we're absolutely seeing core psychological problems manifest in slightly new ways because of the way that technology is intersecting with our mind. As an aside, incels are 8 times more likely to be on the autism spectrum than the general population.
Sure.
Now, when it comes to social media, we don't know what a normal human being or normal woman or whatever is supposed to look like right now. I think it's actually way worse than that. It's not that there are Instagram filters and stuff like that for other people. Now, for the first time in the history of humanity, there is a good version of you out there and there is a bad version of you out there. So this is the first time that I can be both simultaneously beautiful and simultaneously ugly. So it's not even comparison. So I think this is where technology has done something new. Human beings have been comparing themselves to other human beings who are more attractive than they are from the dawn of time. Today is the first day that you can compare the person that you're comparing yourself to is an idealized version of yourself.
Sure. So
when I apply filters on my selfies or whatever and upload them and I have this whole persona that's like edited or whatever, like this, I suspect really screws with people, because now when I look in the mirror, I'm not even comparing myself to someone else. I'm comparing myself to a version of myself, which I suspect is actually psychologically even more damaging.
That wouldn't surprise me at all. There are people that I know, and I joke about this with a few friends. There are girls that I know in real life who are like, you are the most beautiful girl. You're unbelievably beautiful. It's unreal. And these people will spend an ungodly amount of time like editing their photos and stuff. And it's like, And it's so funny because like you bring up the incel thing. Like I'll talk to people who are like, oh, like I wish I was more attractive. I'd have more self-esteem and I'd feel better about myself. And it's like, bro, I know people that you would kill to be half as attractive as, and they don't even have self-esteem. They don't even think they look good. Like they're seeing flaws in their face and body that I in a million years wouldn't even imagine. I didn't even know people were concerned about, like when they twist the way that there's like a crease and I didn't even know people thought about this stuff. And people are like, yeah, dude, that face tune-up, all of that stuff is just, it's so psychologically damaging. Yeah, and I think probably, I said this a long time ago, and I thought it was really funny. One of the genius of those very early, I don't know if these started with Snapchat or with Vine, but those filters that like gave you the dog ears, the very, very, very primitive ones way back in the day, those are really smart because all of those filters, they not only gave you the funny thing, they also did like the face smoothing stuff too. And I think people actually started to like the way they saw with all the play stuff or whatever, because it also made their face like very smooth and very perfect. It got rid of imperfections and stuff. But yeah, you're probably right in that like comparing yourself to other people worldwide who have surgery and all that is psychologically damaging. Comparing yourself to the most perfect version of yourself that is literally unattainable is also probably even more psychologically damaging to some extent.
Yeah, and I think there's even weird kind of subtle manifestations. I mean, we're talking some about women, which I think I see more instances of women using filter than men. But I think one really interesting manifestation of this, I don't know that the problem is necessarily worse for women, which may sound weird. But one of the things that I sometimes wonder about is, so I'm kind of curious, Stephen, do you take selfies of yourself?
I sometimes, but not very, very rarely. Yeah.
Right. So I think that if I really tunnel down, I think if you asked 1,000 men, why don't you take pictures of yourself? I would suspect that a high number of them don't take pictures of themselves because of the way that they look. So I think what we're starting to see is in generally, if you look at the epidemiology of mental illness, the gender divides are starting to shrink. And I think what's going on is that there are core psychological challenges which manifest differently based on whether, you know, you're a man or a woman, which I don't know how much of this is biological. I suspect that more of it is cultural. And so we're starting to see these divides shrink. So like the difference between, you know, anxiety between men and women is decreasing. I think there's a lot more awareness that men have borderline personality disorder now, that women have narcissistic personality disorder. So I think we're starting to see a lot of kind of evening out of illness. And then I think that especially for a lot of men, like just from a clinical perspective, women are about 2 to 3 times more as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety than men. But what I sort of noticed is that when I work with men in psychotherapy, they don't describe it as anxiety. They describe it as pressure. I feel pressure. I feel pressure. I feel pressure. And then I'd ask them, okay, what do you mean by pressure? And they're like, well, what they would essentially say is, I'm worried that this thing won't work out. I'm worried that I won't be able to. I'm worried about this. They're thinking about the future, and they're thinking about falling short in some way, where if you really tunnel down into what is anxiety, anxiety is worries about the future.
Sure.
And even to the point where you know, the pressure can be so profound that people can sometimes become suicidal and things like that. So I think we're sort of, and there's even some data that suggests that even our system of mental illness diagnosis is biased in a sense, not towards women, but since women are more likely to be diagnosed with mental illness, there are more studies on women. The way that we conceptualize a particular illness is based on primarily female patients. And I'm not trying to like get into a gender dynamics thing. I think this is just a well-acknowledged bias in the research.
Yeah, there's a lot of criticism because early like cluster B personality disorders, things like histrionic personality disorder stuff, people are saying like, oh, well, you're just pathologizing what would be like a normal woman behavior or whatever. This isn't fair, that a lot of the early psych stuff sometimes demonizes women or whatever in some ways. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And so there's just all kinds of biases about how we've developed our classifications. So histrionic personality disorder, even hysteria as an example, is like, you know, just a real tragedy that even exists today, where oftentimes people will disqualify. Speaking earlier when you were sort of talking about, you know, like emotions are irrational. We have this idea that emotions are irrational. And if someone, especially a woman, is behaving emotionally or expressing emotions, that we will attribute that to things related to their uterus. Sure. Which there are some links between mood and you know, menstrual cycle and things like that. But nowhere does it rise to the level, except if you're talking about frank psychosis. But just because someone is more prone to a particular mood does not invalidate their experience or anything like that, which is a real mistake that we make.
Something that I fight with a lot. It's very funny. Kind of, you talk about how like men express things in different ways, or a man might feel anxiety, but he calls it pressure. One thing that's really funny about it is I fight on a lot of podcasts with a lot of red pillar people who say things like, "Oh, emotionality is for women, stoicism is for men. In general, women are very emotional and men are not emotional." And I always point out when I argue these people, it's like, are you considering anger an emotion? Because men can be very quick to anger, and anger is correlated with things like testosterone. And it's very funny because when they'll say that like women are emotional and men aren't, they never really consider anger to be like an emotion. That's not like a thing. So if you point out that like men could be quick to violence and quick to anger, like if you've got like two women that are screaming at each other, people will go, oh, well, these are very feminine, emotional women. If you've got a man that's screaming at somebody, people go, oh, that's a very emotional, effeminate man. But if two men want to fight and kill each other over some incredibly stupid shit outside of like a restaurant, those are just like men being men, and they don't consider any emotionality there. It's just kind of funny because it reminded me of what you said earlier for like a man will have anxiety but call it pressure, so he thinks he doesn't have anxiety. And some men will be very quick or prone to anger or violence, but they don't consider themselves emotional because they don't consider that like an emotion. It's kind of like a word game to hide things that we don't want to confront, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't mean to. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, but I'd like to understand this perspective that you're alluding to. But
Yeah, sure.
I don't mean to try to put you in a place where you have to adopt that perspective. So when they say men are
Anywhere you
stoic,
want, go for it. Yeah.
what does that mean? Women are emotional and men are stoic.
I'm gonna try. Okay, I'm gonna use a lot of really triggering words. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to describe this without using triggering words. Okay.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, there is a thing, a broad category of things that I would call like toxically masculine. Okay, that toxic word triggers a hell of a lot of people. But basically, it's the idea that like a man's job is to basically shut up, deal with everything, be cold, emotionless, a warrior, provider, protector. Anything that comes at him, he just deflects off with this cool, aloof, stoicistic way or whatever, and he just works through things like that. And that worrying about stuff or being afraid or being scared or having doubts, that's in the domain of women, but men are never supposed to have those feelings. That's like essentially kind of the like the manosphere or like red pill belief for the difference between how men and women process emotions, essentially.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think a couple things that I would kind of, and I recognize you don't believe this, but so the first is that I think not feeling emotions does not mean that you are not emotional.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what I tend to find is that when people use a lot of emotional suppression, they're just not aware of it, but it absolutely controls their behavior. It just gets displaced or transmuted in some particular way. So, we kind of know this somewhere if you look at, for example, like people who have addictions. So a lot of like addictive behavior correlates with your internal emotional state, which you may be colorblind to. So men are more likely to be, there's something called normative male alexithymia. So alexithymia is colorblindness of emotions.
Okay.
So you are unaware of your internal emotional state.
Oh, okay.
And the reason we call it normative male alexithymia is because it is culturally normal, not saying it's healthy, but is a cultural standard for men to be alexithymic. So we're not even aware when we're feeling a particular way.
Yeah.
The other thing about
the biggest way this manifests for me is a quick thing is I will be really angry because I haven't eaten, but I won't notice it until I eat. Like I'll eat and then I'll be like, oh my God, I was in such a horrible mood. I wasn't even aware of it. So I understand what you say when you say that 100%. Yeah.
So this is the other funny thing is that the thing about anger is an umbrella emotion. So what I tend to find is that when men say that they're angry, oftentimes they're feeling all kinds of other things, but the only thing that we've been culturally normalized to express is anger, right? So when someone breaks up with you, you say, man, screw that person. Like you get angry at all kinds of things, but underneath, like when you get broken up with, what do you feel? You feel shame, 100%, because someone dumped you, right? But that's not what you express. You're like, oh, screw that person. Screw everybody. Screw all of this class of people. You also feel fear, right? Because this person broke up with me. Like, what does that mean about other people breaking up with me? Does this mean that I will be able to find love? There's usually all kinds of emotions that look like anger, but it's really like the number one umbrella emotion that covers all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah, I wish I saved this. I feel like I read something or saw a graph or a chart or something where it talked about like first order, second order, like emotional states, and that like some of these are illusory. and it kind of alluded to the point that you were making, that like anger isn't actually like a real emotion, or it kind of is, but it's usually flowing from something else. So anger might be the way that you represent massive insecurity, or it might be a way that you represent like massive frustration with something. You might call it anger, but that anger emotion isn't actually that in and of itself. You don't just feel angry about a particular thing. Usually there's something else that leads into it. And there are a couple different emotions that they describe. I wish I remember where I read that from, but yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And I mean, even if we look at someone who's narcissistic, right? When you challenge someone who's narcissistic, they will get angry at you. But underlying it is like, the fear that if you call someone stupid and they're afraid that they're stupid, they will get pissed at you because you could be right. And that's what they're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
And so I think it makes a lot of sense that, people sort of believe men are stoic. But I don't. And I think that's also the reason they believe that is probably because that's their experience. They don't walk around feeling a whole lot of shame, or even when they do feel shame, they get angry with themselves, right? You beat yourself up. You're a loser. You're a beta. You're a whatever. Yeah. Because you feel these negative things, and the only socially acceptable thing to feel is anger.
Yeah, I think Erudite. I don't know if you've heard of her or not. And maybe even you might have talked about this. I've heard this repeated a lot, that as children, one of the social advantages for women is the way that little girls tend to express emotion is through like crying. And when somebody's crying, you want to help them cry and work out their emotions. And as a result of that, women are kind of socialized to deal with their emotional processing better. Whereas for boys tend to be a bit more physical. And when we get emotional, we want to like hit things or whatever. And you're very immediately like shut down, like don't hit, that's wrong. And you kind of have like this inward, like, okay, well, when I express emotion, I get in big trouble for it. Nobody helps me work through it. So you're kind of socialized to never really process or deal with those emotions. Whereas little girls get a ton of help with it. I don't know how true that is in terms of empirically backed up, but I've heard that repeated a lot.
I think there's a fair amount. So that used to be way more true than it is today. But it's not just that. It's that we also know that it's not just that kids hit things more. I would even say there's one layer before that, which is that generally speaking, young boys, at least when I was growing up in like the 80s, we were not allowed to express any emotion besides anger.
Yeah.
Right? So if I cry in a locker room, like, it's GG, man. There's no way.
And you would literally, the comparison would be you'd be called a girl. That was the insult. Like, you are a girl. You're like a girl. You're like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was just not. So I think part of the reason that, and this is where I think we have to be a little bit careful, because boys are more physical, like that may be true, but I think that could also be a cultural consequence.
It could be, yeah, of course.
That the only thing that we're allowed to do is be physical. So that's what we lean into.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing like more fluctuation there, where I saw something like 20% of Gen Z or Gen Alpha identifies as LGBTQIA or something like that. And I think that there's a lot more variable expression of gender identity now. So like people, I'll see dudes that have their nails painted, and that's like fine. So yeah, but I think everything you were saying about social media is like spot on. I mean, I think there's a lot of research to support that body dysmorphia is on the rise, things like filters. And then also what you said, your general thesis, I think, is also spot on, that essentially we have these circuits in our brain which have evolved over millions of years. And what platforms have discovered is that when I take advantage of this particular circuit, people will use my platform more. So I noticed recently that there's a particular app that I have that anytime you take a picture, the default is that it applies a filter.
Oh, geez.
You don't even have to turn them on.
Uh-huh.
And
yeah,
so
that's wild, yeah.
And I think that people realize, oh, okay, like when people use my app, they'll take pictures on my app more because we apply filters.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, so what else? Any other thoughts about like what's going on with mental health in the world today?
I think usually when I talk to people, I usually say if you're having mental health issues, there's like 4 pillars that I think that people should focus on. The first is diet. And when I say diet, I just mean like very broadly, like healthy macros and micros. Like it doesn't have to mean like no fast food ever, or you're going completely green or whatever, but just like make sure you're getting like a good mix of like, like fats, protein, carbs, and make sure you're like eating some type of like leafy green and not too much. So like basic dietary stuff is the first pillar. Second pillar is some type of exercise. Man, we truly like have evolved to be the most like long distance running mobile animals It's like so much of our biology goes into like the ability to sweat and dissipate heat, and all of that is completely tossed to the wayside when we sit at a computer for 12 hours a day. So like 30 minutes even of just like walking a day, I imagine would be a like an exponential bump to a lot of people's mental health. One thing that I notice, and this would be a tip that I give to friends with, or people that have friends that suffer with mental health issues, is one of the most important, one of the quickest shortcut ways to get somebody's mood to be improved that is having like a depressive episode or is stuck inside is to literally like pick the person up and say, hey, we're going to go on a walk for 5 minutes. Come with me out into the fucking sunlight. Let's go. I have never in my life met a person having a depressive episode or even a person with depression that after a 5-minute walk, their mood wasn't significantly improved. I'm not saying it's going to fix all their problems or cure everything, but that just like moving your body, existing in the sunlight, very basic things that we've like evolved over millennia to be okay with are things that we kind of like don't do anymore. So the diet, exercise, just like 30, and yeah, don't have to powerlift, like 30 minutes of movement a day. Sleep, again, Jesus, we spend like a third of our lives sleeping. Making sure that you have that in order, like sleep hygiene. Don't go to bed with your phone. You know, the bed is only for sex and sleeping. Don't watch TV there. Don't do anything. Just go to bed. If you have a partner, do your thing, and then sleep. Get your full like 7.5 to 9 hours. Wake up. And then the fourth one is like socialization. You have to be talking to other human beings. You can't exist as your own thing. Like we're social creatures. Like cooperation and language is like probably the most important thing that humans have developed is like the faculty for abstract concepts and language. You have to be talking to people. Those are usually the four things that I say that like these things are probably out of whack if something is mentally going wrong. And they're the things that probably I think everybody needs to focus on as much as they can. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree. You know, it's really interesting because I think I'm beginning to realize we've made, I think, one major mistake in
Just
psychiatry
one?
as a whole.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is potentially a catastrophic mistake.
Sure, yeah.
So back when medicine was evolving, what happened is that as we were developing like instrumentation, psychiatry wanted to play along, right? So we discovered the microscope and microbes, and we started doing biopsies and x-rays, and like medicine became real, right? Prior to that, it was Ayurveda kind of stuff, which, by the way, you're very in line with your 4 pillars.
Sure.
Ayurveda would completely agree.
Yeah.
And so what happened is we in psychiatry decided we wanted to play along. So like everyone else had proof of the realness of their illnesses as opposed to things like humors. And so we in psychiatry tried to play along. And what we started to do is even now you have, companies that I've done this a couple of times where I'll do gene testing on my patients to see which medications they'll metabolize well and stuff like that. And we can do like things like MRIs and we can test an individual in a particular way. But I think out of all of the organs in our body, the mind is the number one organ that in order for it to be healthy, there is a relational component. So we think about mental health or mental illness as existing within one human being, but especially when it comes to the mind. And this is what's so tragic about this is that we've sort of made it the individual's responsibility or the therapist or the psychiatrist's responsibility to fix a mental illness within you. Whereas if you look at a lot of research, what we really find for a lot of mental illness is that what even prevents mental illness is things like socialization and human connection. There's a ton of research on things like oxytocin. But we also have all this stuff around attachment theory where we sort of like figured out that the healthiness of your mind has just as much to do with your relationships or even more than whatever's going on within your mind. And the real tragedy is that we've sort of like missed that part. So even if you look at all of our interventions are all about helping one person. They're not about helping that person or placing the responsibility on their friends or spouses or whatever to like engage with them in a relationally healthy way, which is really what supports mental health. And it's a huge problem because I think we've like horribly miscalculated.
Yeah, I think stop me if I get too crazy here. I think that the reason why it's so difficult when you look at mental health is because I feel like mental health borrows a lot of principles from medicine in terms of like diagnosis and treatment, but the goal is completely different. Like in my opinion, generally speaking, like 99% of the time, when we're talking about like medicine or traditional hospitals, when you're going to these places, they're trying to send you out not dead. That's the point, is to get you back to like a baseline, like not dead. They're not turning you into a healthy person. They're not like helping you exercise or making your heart better or stronger or any of that through cardio. They're giving you medication to reduce your blood pressure. They're giving you a surgery to reset a bone. That's all they're doing. Mental health practitioners, though, are tasked, in my opinion, with a far different standard. Because if a mental health practitioner was compared to a hospital person, the goal is basically just to, make sure the person doesn't hurt themselves, I guess, and that's it. But that's not the goal for mental health. The goal for mental health is to make you come out feeling like really good, like give you tools to like excel in life. And I feel like with that different of a standard placed to try to use the same tools that they use in medicine, it basically sets a lot of like mental health practitioning up for failure, because it's like a doctor is never going to make you strong and muscular with a medication. But a lot of mental health practitioners are almost trying to get people like strong and healthy minds with an SSRI and some therapy. And it's like, that's like a whole life journey to figure out how to like fix a lot of this stuff. And I think that the bar is set way higher and people don't even realize how much more difficult it is for mental health practitioners to get people to where they want to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's some truth to that. I would kind of, I think we have to compare apples to apples. So the first is that you're right that our system of medicine is not about healthcare, is about sick care.
Basically, yeah.
So what we focus on is the removal of pathology, not the building of health. That's true in psychiatry as well. So when you go to a psychiatric hospital, you're not trying to help these people find fulfillment in life. I mean, ideally you do that kind of stuff, and I find it to be very helpful. But that's not what we're trained to do. What we're trained to do is safety and stabilization and things like that. When people are like acutely psychotic or manic or things like that, you have to help them in that way. I think the real tragedy is that in outpatient mental health treatment, we're kind of lost between that. Where if you look at most of our formal training is still in actually the removal of pathology.
Yeah.
It's not in the building of health. Now, this is where things get really tricky because a lot of therapists have discovered that the most sustainable way to keep pathology at bay is to build health, right? In the same way that we know that if you want to prevent an MI, diet and exercise are going to do, well, I don't know if this is statistically correct or not, but I imagine it is, that diet and exercise will overall help your health more than any particular medication.
A blood pressure yeah, for sure, yeah. Now, it reminds me of there's like you've seen the meme where it's like the stupid guy and then like the medium intelligence guy and then like the really smart guy, right?
Yeah.
It's like the stupid guy is like, bro, like just go to the gym and talk to some friends. And the really smart guy is like, well, actually, we need to use CBT plus these medications plus this therapy every week. And then the really smart guy is like, you probably actually just need to get outside and talk to some friends, right? That's what it feels like sometimes. Yeah. We get like a little bit lost in the sauce, for how to like give people healthy minds, Yeah.
And I think the real tragedy is that if you look at, like I said, so the good therapists that at least I know and I've worked with are the ones that help people build that kind of stuff. But that also is not necessarily, there's all kinds of like shades of gray in there where, there's hospitalized and there's post-hospitalization where you can't really think about purpose and stuff like that. You really have to make sure that you don't kind of go back in and you're getting out of bed every day and things like that. And this is the real interesting thing is that there's this whole other branch of therapy which is not pathological in orientation. So this is where like psychoanalysis and these kinds of things start to come in. And there's kind of this continuum. And this is also why I think we see a huge injection of mindfulness into psychotherapy, because I think mindfulness is a good example. Meditation is actually the mental health practice that is designed to go from 0 to 100, not negative 100 to 0. And now what we're discovering is, oh, by the way, if it takes you from 0 to 100, we can use it for people who have some kind of pathology. And this is the crisis in that I see sort of in the field of therapy, is that like a lot of therapists want to help people do that, but that's actually not what we're trained to do. Which, by the way, which is why I think we're seeing this field of coaching emerge. Because what people are discovering, and even like, so for example, McLean Hospital, where I trained and worked, has this Institute of Coaching, which is really interesting. And the Institute of Coaching was started by a therapist. And what they sort of discovered, and this is where you kind of get into things like positive psychology, is like some group of therapists or psychologists discovered, okay, hold on a second. There's this thing called positive psychology, and we can kind of harness that. And then what's really interesting now is, though, if you look at as things become kind of more diagnosis based and protocol based, as a field, we're actually moving away from supporting mental health. I don't think that's what most therapists want to do. It's what we're kind of being shuttled into, because as mental illness gets worse across the globe, now we need more diagnosis, more treatment, more people are suicidal, more people have body dysmorphia. And so we're kind of moving away from that. But there's all kinds of like really scary data. Like the number one thing that correlates with pornography addiction is meaninglessness. The number one thing that correlates with male suicide is thwarted belongingness. And it may not even be due to mental illness. Like this is a huge thing that we've got to be super careful about.
Yeah, I don't disagree. There was the I don't think I brought this up to you before, but something I bring up on stream a lot is that if you looked at the people that were joining ISIS, 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, that were in Europe, like Muslims that were in Europe that were joining ISIS to fight in the Middle East, if you watch the recruitment videos and you looked at the people joining, you're thinking like, okay, man, it just must be like, I guess like the really poor, financially fucked people that are looking for a paycheck or someplace to live. That wasn't true though. It was middle class people. And if you watched the videos, it wasn't like, we're going to give you money. The videos were like, we've got something for you to fight for. Here's like purpose and meaning in life. Like that's what everything was geared towards. And then funny enough, if you look at like any cult's like recruitment strategy or any large political movement's recruitment strategy, which political movements oftentimes are indistinguishable from cults, oftentimes that's it. It's like, here's meaning, and especially with, not to branch out to 50 million things, but especially as like religious importance has kind of like subsided in society, we've kind of lost a lot of that overarching narrative of our lives that religion like so easily gave us. And without that overarching narrative, man, it could be really hard to push through a lot of really difficult stuff in life. Because like fighting through life when you don't know what the purpose is or what's on the other end is almost impossible. Whereas if you feel like there's something on the other end, you can fight through impossible odds, So that general loss of meaning, that doesn't surprise me. That probably correlates with so many different things in terms of negative mental health outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because even if you look at Hinduism and Buddhism, we call these things religions, but the word religion is actually like a Western concept, right? So when we think in the West about a religion, like, so it's kind of weird because people will ask, can you convert to Hinduism or or how do I convert? People will sometimes ask me, how do I convert to Hinduism? How do I convert to Buddhism? And I'm sure there's some kind of induction ceremony or diksha or something like that, but it's not really conversion. Someone will do a ceremony for you if you really want it. But the concept of conversion, in that there's people of this religion and not of this religion, is actually kind of foreign to like the Eastern religions or those kind of what I would call the karmic religions. And what's really interesting is what they sort of focus on is this idea of dharma or duty or responsibility or purpose. And there's a really core concept, which I think is sort of like, I kind of think it's scientifically valid. And this is why we're seeing in the third wave of psychotherapy, like these therapies like DBT and ACT, they're basically incorporating some of these Eastern philosophies. To me, that sort of speaks to their almost like objective correctness, but I could be biased because I was raised in these traditions or saw a lot of value in them. But I think if if that's what the science shows, that's what the science shows. But I think the big thing that we sort of discover is that when you have a purpose, you can tolerate negativity.
Yeah.
And in the absence of purpose, you're stuck seeking out pleasure and avoiding pain. And if you build a life that is seeking out pleasure and avoiding pain, that life will lead to unhappiness or a lack of contentment. And so I think what's really cool about these Eastern things, and this is what we kind of try to teach, right? But without being religious, I don't think it's really a religious concept. It's just people sort of figured out, they're like, hey, if you're struggling, you should do this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think on the global, it makes perfect sense to me that people who are joining ISIS are like lacking purpose in their life. And that's what we sort of see. Why do people get addicted to pornography? It's because they don't have a reason not to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually, now that you say that, it's really funny because two things that I didn't realize, two things just super clicked in my head. And I realize now why I say one thing without even realizing before. So that having that purpose is really important. Anytime somebody comes up to me and they ask me, like, I'm trying to figure out, I had a friend recently who was like, I don't know if I should move to LA. I don't know if I should move to New York. I don't know if I should move to Miami. Or a friend is like, I don't know if I should, stream for 2 more years. I don't know if I should do this. every single time a person comes to me for advice, the first thing I always ask is, where do you want to be in 1 year? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What do you want to be doing later? And if they don't know, then I always tell them like you're whatever answer you come up with here is meaningless. Because if you don't know where you want to be in a year or 5 years, like who cares what you decide now? Like, but if you know where you want to be in 5 years, if you know what you're like aiming for, all the other decisions are actually super easy. There's very few conflicts in life that are hard to solve. They might be or rather, the solutions are usually simple. They might not be easy, but they're usually simple if you know where you want to be, right? That's why when you're in high school, when you're picking classes as a junior, you usually say, well, what do you want to do in college? Because that'll tell you what classes you need to take as a senior, and that'll tell you what you need to take as a junior, right? And then same thing with difficulties in life. If you want to be in 5 years at some place financially, well, then you know that you probably have to make difficult decisions right now about how you're going to increase your earning power. But at least you know where you're headed, so you have the ability to suffer through and push through and do that. And the decisions kind of fall in line. But people trying to figure out really complicated answers to questions now, where they don't know where they want to be, even in like 1 or 2 years, it's an insurmountable task. And whatever you choose, you're going to be like aimlessly wandering through life doing it.
Yeah, I think what I tend to see, completely agree with that, is that even if you look at like dating, right? So people don't have a North Star and they get stuck in this loop of optimization. Mm-hmm. So when I see people who are paralyzed and they're trying to figure out, okay, what should I do? They're usually trying to figure out, okay, what is the most efficient decision? What is the best decision to make? Whereas what I tend to find is that when people have purpose, you actually make a lot of inefficient or poor decisions. But those are the right decisions and they're worth it. And the simplest way I would describe it is that, everyone's trying to figure out, okay, how do I find the right partner? Whereas like the way to have a successful relationship is to fall in love with arguably the wrong person. And then if you're lucky enough, you find a way to make it work because there is a North Star or some kind of compass that moves you there. I don't think falling in love is sufficient, but it's a huge part of it. And then when people kind of go all in on it, there may be all kinds of reasons why this is not the right relationship. And then I think the reason to stay or go depends on whether that person is willing to work with you to like make it what it needs to be. But I see for far too long, I've seen so many people where I'd say the core of their problem is like you're trying to figure out what the most efficient solution is, but you've got no direction.
Yeah.
And so
you can optimize
paralyzed.
really well for like many things in your life, but like, what are you optimizing for?
Yeah, right.
People always ask, people will say things like, do you think it'd be good if I did this? And my answers are like, well, good with respect to what? Like it could be, or it could be the worst decision ever. It really depends on what you're trying to do, Yeah.
Yeah. And I think another issue here is that I think we've lost touch with what we want because society has gotten so good at telling us what we want.
Lost touch. I'm thinking about that statement. I want to disagree, but it's probably going to be semantically. We'll probably agree. I think that the problem is I think that we go after what we want too much, but our wants are very short-term oriented. Like everybody, like for instance, like if I were to make a really edgy statement, I would say every single person that's obese wants to be obese. And the reason why they want to is because they want to sit on the couch. They want to watch TV. Well, play computers these days, sorry. They want to eat foods that are high in sugar. They want to avoid exercise at all costs. If you want all of those things, well, then you want to be obese. But nobody really wants to be obese, but it's that it's the time horizon and everything, the windows of like all the short-term pleasures are there. And if you're doing all of that, you're always building towards this thing that in the grand, you might not want it. Like overall, you might want something different. But we make so many decisions in such short time windows that we seem to like lose sight of the grander thing.
Yeah. So what do you think it is that makes us? I'll top your edgy statement with a story in a second. But
okay.
What do you think it is that makes us lose sight of the long term?
Oh man. So here is I'm doing more woo woo now. I feel like in life, I feel like there is. I know there's some edgy loser philosopher that's probably said this better than me, but I feel like friction in life is actually probably more important than I ever thought it was. Some amount of struggle before pleasure is probably part of the whole pleasure. Like it's probably a necessary part of the human experience. And I think that so for example, something I'll say, I say this to someone who hasn't read a book in so long, but the feeling that you get when you finish a book is incomparable to however many memes you can go through. It feels way more fulfilling. But memes are like more gratifying and you just do that. I think that for a lot of parts of our life, we've stripped out all the friction and we found a way to get the immediate pleasure in everything. And in doing so, we've lost the ability to deal with any amount of adversity or friction to get to a longer goal. And I think that that desire to reduce friction in all areas of our lives has compromised our ability to work towards things, even in the medium term. I think it's that removal of friction.
Yeah, so I'm with you that I think it's an issue of semantics, and I think we're saying the same thing. So I would even add one layer on top of that. So I'm with you that I think we remove friction, right? So we're in the age of food delivery, grocery delivery. You don't have to go to a game store to buy a game anymore, right? Like I can get everything brought to my house. I can make friends on Discord. I can do everything in a frictionless way.
And we get entitled with it so fast too. Like, like only today in 2023, like this fucker that just brought my food from another place in the city won't even come up to my fucking door. I've got to go downstairs to get it. And it's like, bro, holy shit. I find myself doing shit like this. I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like when I was a kid, the internet didn't even exist, and I'm already this spoiled over everything. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that as a consequence of the frictionless, I'm with you in terms of that friction is important, but I'm going to sort of take in a slightly different direction. But I think this is where, leaning on kind of the Eastern stuff for a minute. So I think we've lost the capacity to like introspect and have awareness of our internal drives, which is what I would say leads to a lack of long-term thinking. So if we sort of think about internal drives, right, purpose or dharma or something like that, those tend to be long-lasting, right? So it's like if it's something that you care about, that can usually not be satisfied in a very short amount of time. Whereas what we've done is as our attention has become externalized, the wants that we have become given to us by the outside. Play this new video game, buy this new thing, watch this new movie. You know, and this is where people can talk about materialism. I think it's even deeper than materialism. It's not about materialism, not materialism. It's even like, you know, take this new course on spirituality, like, and be more fulfilled. Right?
The 5-minute body.
Right? 5-minute body, the 5 minutes to enlightenment, you know, like do it faster. The 5 tips that keep you from getting enlightened. Like it's all this kind of like instant gratification stuff. But the main thing is that literally our mind is not paying attention. It's not looking this way. It's looking that way. And when we do that, I think we fundamentally lose sight of what we want, and they're replaced by almost conditioning. And I've seen this a lot in some of the patients or clients that I've worked with where they've been conditioned to want to be successful. And they do a lot of stuff, they make a lot of sacrifice, but the sacrifice they're doing is to make their parents happy. And then they sort of end up successful where they should be happy, and instead their life feels empty. And I was really worried for a little while. I went and talked to one of my supervisors about this because 30% of my patients within 1 year to 18 months of joining my practice would make a major career change. And I started to like be scared that I was like, hold on a second, am I imposing my value system on people so they're like giving up the career that they've spent a decade or two doing? And I was really concerned that I was like, you know, doing things, maybe I was biasing people or things like that. But it turns out I don't really think I was. It just turns out that when you start to ask people questions about, okay, like, what do you want? And once you really do a thorough introspective exploration, people find out answers, and then they start to change the direction of their life. And so I'm with you. I don't think we actually disagree, but I think that's kind of the issue, is that we're so caught up in this sort of frictionless gratification that we lose sight of what we actually care about.
Yeah. I think that it's funny because something you just said here actually wraps around to something you said close to the beginning of our conversation. Is you said one of the issues with mental health is that it seems like we're ceding control of our mental well-being to other people. And in a way, that's kind of what you just said here, that we're externalizing even our drives to other people around us. And it's so funny because I think of like, I'm borrowing a lot from like red pill stuff because that's what I've been fighting with recently. But like when these people talk about, like, you've heard about like the grind set, right? Yeah. Wake up at 4 a.m., take a cold shower, go like all these like crazy things, right? And it's like, where does is that your drive, or have you actually like externalized that process and now somebody else is giving you a drive to be on the grind? Do you even want to be on the grind? What are you even grinding for? You're like, what do you even care about? Yeah. What are you saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely their drive. So I mean, I don't, you know, I'm pulling stuff from offline conversations and stuff like that, and even clients or patients. But I think that my experience with a lot of people who espouse the philosophy, and it's not really fair if we're not, representing them accurately. So let's just acknowledge that, is that oftentimes these people they value something deep down on the inside. Like, I want to feel good about myself. I want to feel proud of myself. I want to be loved. But oftentimes what I find in most of the red pill people I work with is like there's a decent chunk of trauma involved.
Yeah.
Where, and then what happens is someone comes to you and says, okay, like, if you want something in life, it's been hard for you to achieve it, right? Because you've been trying really hard. And so there's almost this kind of like bias towards the harder something is, the more valuable it is.
Yeah.
And then what people do is they sell you this idea that like, oh, since you're suffering so hard, like a big problem requires a big solution. And if you are suffering really, really, really bad, something as simple as seeing a therapist for 1 hour a week for 8 months surely cannot fix your problem. You need a bigger solution to your big problem. And so you have to sacrifice everything you've got. 4 a.m., cold showers. You have to slap yourself on the nuts every single day to build up, because pain is weakness leaving the body. And if you do all of these things, you will achieve that thing that you value. Because I do see a lot of sacrifice and focus from these people. But I still think they're chasing something.
Yeah, but that the important thing is they never spend time figuring out what that something is. So like I especially look at this in relation to a lot of the advice and critiques they give of like relationship stuff, where I notice that when I listen to a lot of these red pill people, curiously, none of them talk about relationships. They might talk about like intersexual marketplace dynamics, or they might talk about like the most effective ways to hook up with people, or they might talk about like reproductive strategies or whatever. But I've never heard like a red pillar say like, if you're having a big argument with your significant other, like what's the best way to resolve the conflict where both parties, come away feeling okay. Like I've never heard a conversation like this ever. It's just like I guess it's like you said, like there's a lot of push or drive to something, but people like, I don't even know if people know what that something is, other than being like the top 1% richest guy, like whatever the most consumerist, hyper capitalist. Yeah, God.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it correlates with, but I suspect that there's something deeper psychological about love and acceptance, because usually in the trauma that at least I've seen is oftentimes very explicitly a lack of love and acceptance.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that I don't, in a weird way, I kind of don't fault them for what you're saying, is that they don't talk about how to resolve a relationship with a significant other, because I don't think they think about their unit. And this is where we could be unfair. But my experience of listening to these people and working with these people is the fundamental unit through which you go through life is an individual, right? Because no one, as you said earlier, no one cares about you.
Class. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right. So no one is going to care about you. You have to look out for yourself. So they go through, like, life is a single player game from them. It's not a co-op game. So if you kind of think about it, you're not playing co-op with a partner. Partners are NPCs and they dehumanize them. So you can kind of see, okay, I'm playing, like, life is a single player game, and like relationships are with NPCs. And that's the way so why would I care about an NPC's feelings? It's just not the way that I conceptualize life.
Yeah, I agree. For a lot of the dating advice, it feels, as a critique I have a lot, is that a lot of it feels very zero-sum and very adversarial. Like if one side is winning, it means the other side is losing. So you've got to do your best to get one over the other person as much as you can.
Yeah, and I think the reason they feel that way is because that's been their experience. Because they used to be the NPC, which is what a beta is, right? And I'll be damned if I'm ever the NPC again. So I'm gonna be in control. I'm gonna get this stuff. And I think the real there's a lot of good stuff, I think, in Red Pill, because they advocate for a lot of individual responsibility. I've seen a lot of people who will make like objective progress in their life, right? It's kind of weird because it's sort of like, in my opinion, kind of this maladaptive strategy where it kind of gets you out of some problems, but then kind of keeps you stuck. And then you sort of have to grow out of that. And some people do and some people don't.
It's very hard to make people understand that maladaptive strategies are usually incredibly effective up to a point.
Yeah.
And this is probably true of all. As a musician going through college, you can learn to play something in a bad way, but it works really well. But eventually you hit a wall where you can't improve your technique beyond a point because you're not really doing it correctly. But then the difficult thing about getting rid of a maladaptive behavior is it always requires you to regress in terms of whatever skill you're doing before you can make progress again, which makes it so difficult to move people out of maladaptive habits.
Yeah. One of my supervisors once told me that the process of growing up is discarding things that work.
Sure. That have worked up until a point, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So it's, at the age of 20 or at the age of 30, it sounds like you're discovering that, hey, friction maybe isn't all that bad.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's oftentimes it's their experience of things that got them out. Right. And then the problem is that if believing in a particular philosophy helped you advance in so many objective ways, why are you going to give that philosophy up?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's always the hardest.
If I stop doing this, then I'm going to go back to where I was, and I certainly don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you said, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, like any cult, any red pill, any super left wing, whatever, like everything is probably going to improve you in some way. Otherwise, nobody would join, right? Even multi-level marketing schemes are going to have people super motivated and probably picking up some kind of good habits in the beginning. So talking people down from those things, especially if people found those things because they were hurting and they were in a bad place, it's very, very, very difficult to impossible to talk somebody down from that without them going through a lot of experiences themselves. To realize why it might not be the best way to go through life. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it when you talk about woo-woo stuff.
Yeah, me too. That's probably been a big change over the past. Well, I hate. I'm going to trigger you now because this is my shortcut. Probably doing a really big mushroom trip like 3 or 4 years ago. It has probably opened me up a little bit more to more macro level analysis of things. To where sometimes, almost in a way earlier, how you said that like the brain and mental health is like relational to other people. In some ways, like all parts of your life are probably a bit relational. And you can take somebody that knows all the studies and has like the hyper discrete analysis of every single part of your life that's trying to like min-max everything versus somebody who might believe in some, silly religion or karma or blah, blah, blah. And that person's actually doing way better because that overarching view just tends to connect things in such a simple, beautiful, elegant way that works for them, rather than the guy who's like, okay, well, I ate 2 more carbs today than I was supposed to, and I didn't blah, 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 So I have a much bigger appreciation now for the macro level things. And rather than trying to view it as like a discrete versus macro, what I try to do is like, okay, well, here's like a big macro woo-woo thing, and it seems to work for a lot of people. So instead of discarding that and starting over, why not find out like, well, what are the things in here that are probably working for everybody? And like, what can you learn from that and take from that and maybe apply it to your own life, or maybe like study discreetly,
What I'm curious about is why would you saying that be triggering for me?
Because mushrooms was probably a bit of a shortcut rather than a whole bunch of introspection or
I mean, so mushrooms. So speaking of changing my tune or changing tunes, so I think there's a lot of very good supportive data around the use of psychedelics for all kinds of stuff, and we know that these are substances that have been used in spiritual traditions for like thousands of years. And I don't think that. I mean, I think it's all part of your path.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And do you think that is so you mentioned earlier that you think you have become a better person, and I'm sorry if I'm misquoting you, but that's what I thought I heard.
I hope I said that. Yeah. I hope I'm always becoming a better person. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all part of it. Yeah. Hopefully.
I see that in you. I'm not quite sure how or why, but I see a lot of, and I hope that's not like condescending or arrogant to say, but I really respect a lot of what you've become. I think you were always a piece of it, but something about it seems more potent and more driven and more helpful to the people around you.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate it.
And I think if mushrooms, the one thing to just be careful about is that I don't know exactly what your circumstances were, but I think one of the things that we're starting to see in the data is that it's not the substance itself necessarily, it's the circumstances around the substance that lead to a positive outcome or a bad outcome. So there are, bad outcomes from people tripping. I've certainly seen that a lot clinically, where if you're in a really dark place, you want some kind of revelation, and then the trip goes the wrong way, and then you kind of end up with like PTSD or something like that.
Sure.
or the birth of an anxiety disorder. But we also know that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and even spiritual experiences, when couched in sort of safe spiritual traditions, seem to have positive and transformative experiences for people, provided that you put the right guide rails around them.
Mm-hmm. I used to argue with my wife about this a lot. I view travel actually in the same way. A lot of people will say things like, travel is so good for you. It makes you a better person. Psychedelics is so good for you. They make you a better person. It's like, it could or it couldn't. It just depends. It's like a tool, right? Sometimes people can travel around the world and become like way more exposed to different cultures and people and like really flesh out and well-round their opinion about humanity. Or you could like do the total opposite of that depending on how you utilize it. But it just kind of depends on, everything is like I have a very instrumental approach to these types of things. You can use them to grow and learn, or you can just goof off and have fun, or you can probably use them in a way that's detrimental to your, mental health or your progress as a person.
One of my friends who's a psychiatrist, he's a big proponent of the use of psychedelics, and one of the interesting things that he kind of mentioned that he's a little bit concerned about is that, at least in the U.S., these are quickly becoming medicalized, and he thinks that while they have therapeutic value in a medical setting, that they have value outside of a medical setting as well, in terms of like growth in spiritual traditions and things like that, which I thought was a really interesting point.
Yeah. I definitely agree. I do think that to loop a little bit back to the mental health thing, I do think that our lifestyles are like very incompatible with healthy minds in general. I think that our world is hyper selecting for a very, very, very narrow group of a certain type of mind, and then everything else is being pathologized or left to the wayside. And that as that narrows more and more, I think we're probably going to see more and more mental health issues pop up. I just said more like 30 times. But like sedentary, like right now we're selecting for people like me, I guess. Sedentary lifestyle, can sit in front of a monitor for a long time, doesn't get RSI, is happy and likes being in front of a computer screen, and does that like all day. And if you're anybody that if you like to spend more time outside, if you need to move more, if you do whatever, it feels like the world is becoming increasingly incompatible for a large number of people. And then we're seeing that bleed out into a lot of different mental health things. So it feels like you're fighting a really tough uphill battle against really like all of society when you're trying to help people like get into a healthy mental state, when you're living in this world with social media and computers and sedentary lifestyles and unhealthy food and everything. It seems very difficult.
Yeah, I sort of agree. I mean, I think that I agree with sort of your premise, but I don't think that the world is pushing people towards a sedentary lifestyle, but I don't think that a sedentary lifestyle makes people successful. So I think even this conversation, I think, is a good example of one thing that we've got going for us, is that the rate of change is rapidly increasing. And so this is one of the reasons why technology has infected every part of our life.
Yeah.
But I also think that our ability to change back or tackle technology is faster than it's ever been before. So if we kind of think about the advent of streaming, right? Streaming got big, like 10, 15 years ago? And we already have whole-scale appreciation in the field about the mental health impacts of streaming. So we're going to TwitchCon, VidCon, and all kinds of other cons where these platforms are inviting us to speak about like creator mental health and how to build healthy relationships with technology and things like that. That's why we're going to the American Psychiatric Association. So I think even if you look at things like COVID, I mean, we had a novel illness rip through our world population and increase the mortality in a way that we've never seen before. And within 2 years, we had a vaccine, whereas we still don't have vaccines for HIV or herpes virus or all kinds of other things that have been around for a long time. And so I'm a little bit optimistic because I think people, just because it's hard, the reason I think it's hard is because we have not taught human beings how to resist the impulses of technology.
Yeah. The thing that scares me the most is I think that I think we're very, very, very good at solving problems that have like money behind them. We're so good at that. I'm a huge proponent of capitalism. We're very, very, very good at allocating money to solving problems that have financial rewards. And as individuals, we get pretty good at optimizing for either financial rewards or immediate happiness. But it doesn't seem like there's very much reward for like teaching people how to have better friendships or relationships, or it's more tenuous to find that reward. And so I guess I just worry that I don't know if society is incentivized to solve those issues because it's easier to temporarily alleviate somebody's unhappiness, with another TikTok video than it is to like teach somebody how to like truly find happiness or fulfillment in life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't disagree with anything that you said, but I come to a slightly different conclusion. I guess the way I'd put it is I'm less pessimistic.
Okay. That's good.
I mean, so for example, 2 days ago or yesterday, the Surgeon General of the United States released a report on loneliness and connection as like a new public health problem. So I think that, and this is just what we've seen, is that, so for example, we're doing an analysis of we worked with about 400 creators. And what we found is that helping people be mentally healthy improves their stream performance, roughly. We're still analyzing the data. And so I think what we're quickly discovering as a society, so now mental illness has surpassed cardiovascular disease and cancer in terms of being the most costly to society. Yeah. So cost of morbidity and mortality is like way higher for mental illness. So I think what we're, for good or for worse, even if I agree with your premise that we're sensitive to things that make us money or create value is what I would say, I think we're quickly discovering from an economic standpoint that like helping people be happy, we sort of discovered this with remote work, right? Oh my God, there's going to be productivity costs. No, actually, when you don't have to commute an hour each way to work, people are just as productive. Now, there are other forces that are moving against that, like commercial real estate apparently is about to collapse or is in the process of collapsing and things like that. So you have other kinds of interests where people are pushing to come back to work. But I mean, I think that, there's been even if people push to come back to work, I think 20% of the populace is going to be, working from home.
Something that I'm kind of curious about, I don't know if you have strong opinions on this. The way that I viewed work from home is I view work from home as like an augmenter to whatever direction you were going. So for instance, if you are somebody that had like a pretty decent social life and then work from home came out for you, it's like improved your life in so many different ways. Now you've got more time for your family, you've got more time for friends, you don't have to waste much time working, you don't have to commute, thank God. It's like a godsend. But if you're a work from home person and your life before was like kind of lonely and shitty, now it's like even more lonely and shitty. Now you don't even see like the barista in the morning. You don't even see coworkers physically. That there might be people that live in 1 to 2 rooms for weeks at a time of their life, and the only person they see is maybe the DoorDash or Uber Eats guy if they catch them after they drop the food off. But otherwise, it's just like a dark room with black curtains, and now it's nothing. Do you think that work from home is generally good for everybody, or do you think there's like the good and the bad depending on like the type of person going into it? Yeah.
I think, with the exception of things like water and sleep, I think there are very few things that are good for everybody. So one of the biggest problems I see in Western society is that we assume human beings are the same, right? So when we come up with stuff like, okay, how many calories should you eat a day? That's not any kind of scientific study of like individual humans. The way that we arrived at 2,000 calories a day is we surveyed a bunch of people and we took all the people who were not sick and then we asked them, how many calories did you eat? We averaged that number and we made a recommendation for everybody.
Sure.
So I think work from home is sort of the same way, where I'm with you that it's going to work for some people, it's not going to work for other people. But I think this is where, on balance, I think work from home is a good thing. But what it's uncovered is that there are some people who relied on work to be a substitute for social interaction or even like delivering value in the workplace. Yeah. So there's a lot of panic amongst the middle manager level, whose primary job it was to keep people focused and on task. And some of them are like fluff pieces where it turns out actually we may not need you. Yeah. Which is really terrifying for them.
Like the office space. What exactly do you do here or whatever? Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so I think we need to adapt. And this is where, I think like this is where like we make some adaptations that I'm not a huge fan of. Like, okay, let's have like a Zoom happy hour. And that's cool in some ways. And it's not, I think it's like sort of a step in the right direction. But I think we need kind of an overhaul of, first of all, like education. We need to train people in how to understand, control, and protect their mind. I think that should be a core part of education.
Yeah.
And then I think yeah.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I wish for education if I could throw like 2 classes on, like a basic philosophy class and like a basic psychology class, Like one, to understand how to just structure like arguments and thoughts, and then the other to kind of like understand the limitations of your own mind. Just like those two things. There are a lot of other things I would if I could, but God, I wish education like prepared you a little bit more to enter the world like as a human being and not just like a workplace machine, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what's really bizarre is that we actually have some really interesting data. There was a study I think done in New York where they took 12,000 kids and randomized them to two groups. One group has a social and emotional skills training class. And if I remember correctly, what they found is that social emotional skills training is worth 11 points on your grades. So it's worth a full letter grade of performance. And so I think there's bits of data that really suggest that taking care of people's mental health or physical health is worth it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And that there's an ROI. I think just institutions are, a little bit slow to really catch on.
Yeah, because again, if there's not like a direct benefit, even individuals I'll notice will do this. Individuals will burn their candle at both ends when it comes to their mental health because they don't actually see them losing dollars from it. And they don't see like all the negative ways that it manifests in their life. They just have no care whatsoever. And it's like, yeah, there was, I don't know if I brought this up before. There was a funny thought experiment I ran through with a friend a long time ago. She was debating between two apartments because she fucking hated her current roommate. But the problem is the other apartment that she was going to get was like $300 a month more than the one that she was living in now. But she didn't know if the money was worth it, but she hated her current roommate. And I remember asking her, I was like, imagine like, I think like an hour into this conversation, I was like, if you could pay $10 like a day to just like get rid of this person and not have to deal with me. And she answered like before I even finished it, like, yeah, obviously, like I would give you $70 to not have and I was like, yeah, why the fuck wouldn't you just move to another place? It's obviously worth the money. But we have such a hard time conceptualizing like mental agony or mental pain that we will just burn it away in exchange for a little bit of like physical, tangible goods or value.
Yeah, it's hilarious. There's a really interesting study. If you look at Asian Americans who go into therapy, one of the most common thoughts, I don't know if I can say the most common thought, is the cost per minute that they're incurring in therapy. So they're like, okay, how much especially if you look at adolescents and young adults, they'll be like, how much are my parents? They're losing like $5 a minute for a 1 hour session. And am I getting $5 a minute worth of value out of this therapy session? And there's it's really fascinating if you look at the way you framed it. There are actually studies that show. Have you heard of this thing called a quality life year?
No, but it sounds similar to health span versus lifespan, if this is what you're getting at. But
so like insurance and actuaries, when like let's say like you lose a leg.
Okay, yeah.
How much money is a leg worth? And people will come up with numbers. And the way that they figure out how much a leg is worth is they'll ask people questions like, would you rather live to 80 with two legs or 70 with one leg? Or sorry, 80 with one leg or 70 with two legs? And like, what would you pick? Would you rather live to 80 with one leg or 70 with two legs? What do you think?
Oh, you're asking me? Yeah. Oh, man. How is the rest of my health? Is this all else equal?
Yeah, all else equal.
All else equal, I'll give me the one leg and the 10 years more of life.
Okay.
Assuming that, but I'm incorporating that health span versus, assuming I'm having a healthy 10 years. I don't want to be on fucking hospice for the last decade of my life with one leg. But if assuming it's healthy, yeah, I would say I'd probably do one leg. Yeah. Are we saying losing the leg right now, or are we losing the leg when I'm 40 or something?
No, you're losing the leg now.
Oh shit. Okay.
Right.
Damn. Okay, you're putting me on the spot. I'd have to think about it more.
Yeah,
I'd probably opt for the 10 extra years, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, 10 extra years. Okay, so what about 75 years with two legs, or 80 with one leg?
You know what, man? 5 years. Are we losing this leg all the way up to the waist, or are we like knee down, or how much of this leg are we losing?
So this is exactly the point. So this is how they calculate how much half of your leg is worth. Because if we ask enough of those questions, okay, you lose the whole leg. Okay, you just lose your ankle.
Sure.
Lose your leg below the knee. And it turns out that if you ask human beings questions the same way that you were asking that person, is this worth $10 a day? That's how you figure out how much a leg is worth. And how
What's
much
interesting is the time discounting and everything going on here in our minds, though. I feel like we wouldn't be able to accurately gauge it. Like we might say it now, but I'm sure in a different point in time, we'd probably have a different feeling about it. One of the things that go ahead, what were you going to say?
No, I mean, that's true, but go ahead.
I was going to say one of the big things this comes up is constantly, one thing that young people say a lot is, if I ever get Alzheimer's disease, kill me immediately. I don't ever want to have Alzheimer's. Just kill me. Like people will say that relentlessly as a younger person. But personally, my mom has Alzheimer's disease. Her mom did, and my other grandma had dementia. So I'm speaking from limited experience, but I've also never heard this before. I've never heard of a person. I'm sure there are a few, but in general, Alzheimer's people seem to exist day to day. They've got really good moments, and unfortunately, they have increasingly bad moments. But it's quite rare, I think, that somebody like midway into the disease, like, just kill me. I want to die right now, right? Even if as a younger person they might have said that, I don't know if like when you're actually there you feel the same way. So I guess all of that to say that a 75-year-old person with 2 legs who's now looking at 5 more potential years with grandchildren or great-grandchildren or a cool new thing that just came out is now like, fuck, actually I wish I would have given up the leg. I think I do want to live for 5 more years. This isn't worth it. Yeah, is what I was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's also good data to support this idea that human beings grossly underestimate their resilience, and their ability to find happiness in a particular circumstance. So there's strong data to support that. And then, unfortunately, I think there are a lot of people with Alzheimer's who do want to end it. I mean,
jeez, okay, well maybe.
I think there's a variance, right?
Sure.
So because we also know that especially
when you start to get to the very late stages, I'm sure. Obviously, it looks like pretty horrifying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some people, and it depends on what causes the form of dementia, but oftentimes because you're losing just, you have atrophy of the brain, and then as you have atrophy of the brain, sometimes our more primitive negative emotions actually dominate. So our brain has a bias towards negative emotions over positive emotions. So you'll see some very like neurologically oriented depression really start to emerge.
Sure. One of the things you mentioned earlier before this, that humans are very resilient, is I think even in the case of losing limbs and stuff or becoming paralyzed, I think that human general well-being, like it stabilizes like very quickly in a very surprising way. I want to say there's even a study that shows that people with locked-in syndrome can have like a decent quality of life, which is like unfathomable to a person with like the use of all their limbs and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen things specifically on locked-in syndrome, but that's quite severe and quite rare. But I think we definitely know that human beings who get paralyzed and stuff will oftentimes find that they're okay with it and that they're resilient. And the other really interesting thing is the degree of insight correlates with how okay you are. So interestingly enough, the highest risk of suicide is for people who have really bad conditions that they understand very quickly. So
that they understand very quickly, like they understand how bad the condition is, or what do you mean?
Yep. So interestingly enough, if you learn about the ramifications of your illness slowly, you are less likely to commit suicide. So it basically gives you kind of time to adjust, is the simplest way to think about it. Whereas as people who, so for example, if you look at like a neurologist who gets diagnosed with ALS or something, like they may have the degree of insight seems to correlate with how much or how little you want to live. And just if you hang out for a while, if time is on your side, then people adjust. Which is generally speaking why we, tried really, really, really hard to help people who have suicidal tendencies, because I know it sounds really bizarre and people feel like this is going to last forever, but it almost never does.
Yeah. Oh, that's like why the thing for the suicide hotline, like people make fun of it because it's like, who's going to like fix your whole life in a phone call? I was like, oftentimes people just need like 2 minutes to just pause and think. And usually they have like a change of heart, if they're given like a little bit of time to just like stop and reconsider,
Yeah. There's a whole problem there about one of the biggest mistakes that I think people make is when there's a circumstance that makes you feel a certain way, we assume that the solution to that is to fix the circumstance. Right? So kind of like what you said, how is a phone call to the suicide hotline going to fix anything about my life? And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, where I think this is a consequence of us ceding control of our internal tranquility to external circumstances.
Yeah,
and what
it makes sense to somebody.
Yeah. I think what we've almost like lost as a society is the acknowledgement that even if my life is bad, there are ways to develop tranquility in the face of that adversity.
Yeah, if you hear a dog barking in an apartment complex and you want to grab a machine gun and start killing people, and you're thinking like, okay, well, the solution to this problem is obviously to make the person get rid of the dog. Well, that's probably not the solution. The solution is probably you need to find a better way to deal with that external stimulus so that it doesn't make you feel the way that it does, right? Yeah.
And that I think that that example I think is extreme in one way, and I think the real tragedy is that oftentimes when I work with people who are like in abusive situations, when I'm feeling terrible about myself because someone is abusing me, I think this is maybe a slightly more provocative statement, but the way that you feel about yourself, this is what I really see when I work with people with trauma, is the discovery that, the way that I feel about myself has nothing to do with the way that other people treat me. That even if I'm abused, I can feel good about myself, which is a really tricky thing to say because it almost puts the responsibility on the person. But what I really noticed in trauma therapy is that empowering the patient is one of the most important steps. That actually there are things in your life that you do control. And you can't control what people do to you, but you have some iota, some tiny amount of control. And the more that you build on that, the more that you grow on that. And this is how people end up leaving abusive relationships, because they feel like they're not in control.
Yeah, you just have to thread that needle incredibly carefully.
It's
because
really
obviously
hard. Yeah,
people that have trauma or traumatic responses,
absolutely.
if you tell them they can have any responsibility over their mind, you can send them down a depressive spiral. They're like, oh well, fuck. So not only is somebody abusing me, I'm also a fucking idiot because I didn't realize that I could just like think my way out of it, right. So they get like even more like mind fucked on it. Yeah, that's really
so that's a really important needle to thread, and I think a big part of how you walk that tightrope is this is true of tomorrow, but was not true of yesterday. You did not have the capability to break free of this situation. But from this point forward, there is one moment, maybe one grain of sand that you can move. There's some tiny amount of control. So I'm with you that creates a pitfall where then people, because of the low self-esteem, they're going to blame themselves. Why couldn't I figure this out earlier?
And then I think that reminds me of the binary thing I said earlier where, and obviously there's huge discussions over personal responsibility related to like sexual assault or abusive situations or other types of things where there's like, it's very hard for people to accept that like, one is you could take more responsibility for yourself and there are things you can do to avoid negative situations, but two, that doesn't mean it's your fault that something happened to you, and it doesn't excuse the person that did whatever thing they did to you. You know, like you can lock your car door or you can forget to lock your car door. Either way, it's not right for somebody to steal your shit, but that doesn't mean there aren't steps you can take to like avoid it in the future, and it doesn't mean that it was your fault that it happened before because you didn't take those steps in the past, you know. But all of that those are very, 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 very careful conversations to walk through without feeling like you're falling too hard on one side. Yeah.
I think it's especially hard because of what we were talking about earlier. When things are emotionally charged, it's hard to see those shades of gray. Yeah. But I mean, I think empowerment of victims is one of the most important steps, at least in my limited clinical experience. And just like you said, it's not your fault if you grew up in an abusive situation. You have no power in that moment. You know, and I think so much of actually what we see, we're thinking about doing a deep dive on trauma. And one of the things that I've started to really appreciate is so many of the problems that we see in today's society, I think are actually like stealth manifestations of trauma. Even things like lack of motivation and stuff. It's really fascinating if you look into the trauma literature about how if you grow up in an environment where you were controlled by another human being, your brain does not develop the capacity to see the future. Which all the stuff we were talking about, you know, like a lack of a long term. It's like literally because what's the point of thinking about tomorrow when you don't get to decide anything ever? Yeah. You don't get to decide what you eat. You don't get to decide what you wear. You don't get to decide what you do. And so it's almost like that part of our brain kind of like gets shut off and we're not able to think about the future. And so people end up living this very reactive life where it's like, okay, I feel like eating something healthy today or sitting at home and playing a video game. And it's really challenging because I think they blame themselves for this lack of motivation. They know they should be doing something different, but they literally grew up in a situation of coercive control where this has been, I read this paper that's 60 years old about the paralysis of initiation. There's really a term that like old people who are studying like POW folks discovered. Prisoners of war.
Hold on. Oh, yeah. Okay. Just making sure. Okay.
And then what they also discovered is, the stuff that happens with prisoners of war, because you don't know if you're going to be alive tomorrow. So what's the point of thinking about the future? Might as well live for today. And then they discovered that even kids in abusive relationships have this same pattern, and that this pattern is actually pretty pervasive in traumatic situations. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but.
No, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. There's probably a lot of general stuff you can learn. I don't know if I mentioned this in the past, but there was a friend that I had that I was like, helping her with some of her therapy sessions to like help reinforce like positive behaviors. And it was funny because there were some things that she was learning in therapy that they were giving her that I thought were incredibly helpful tools that I wish people had told me. I was like, oh shit, this is actually a really good idea. That's actually where I got the force somebody to go on a walk idea from, was that. And then another thing had to do with one was the concept of radical acceptance, which I thought sounds stupid to me, but then I tried it and I was like, this isn't stupid at all. This is actually pretty important.
Yeah.
And then the third one was keeping track of your emotional state and then not trying to ever resolve problems. They used a 1 to 7 scale. And if you thought that you were at like a 4 or higher, you don't solve any problems there. You use a coping strategy or something, go on a walk, watch your face, do whatever until your emotional levels come down, and then you reapproach the problem, but never try to solve like when you're at like a 5, 6, 7. And those are things that I don't think they teach normal people. That was like mental health for other stuff. But I thought it was funny that like I feel like I'm learning really important skills here, and I didn't even have like the mental health issue, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we see that 11-point bump for social and emotional skills training. It's that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's also what's interesting is that, you know, treatment, I think some of the best treatment for ADHD is actually like organization and planning and productivity kind of stuff, which like when I was learning how to help patients with it, like it helped me a lot too in terms of staying organized and focused and stuff. But anyway, I know we'd sort of talked about talking for a couple hours. How are you feeling now?
Yeah, I'm good. I stream for 10 hours a day, so
okay.
As long as you want me.
My voice is starting to go out a little bit, so I was hoping we could wrap up in about 5 to 15 minutes. I love talking to you, but
yeah.
How do you stream for like 10 hours a day, dude?
Probably practice. Because I've been doing it for a long time, so I'm probably used to it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, something you mentioned earlier that I thought is really cool that you guys do. When it comes to like picking up girls or relationship stuff, or because that's like what a lot of the dating stuff talks about, people always like, what's like the best practice for it? Something that kind of sucks is that like the best practice for it is honestly, it's having lots of friends that are girls from like the ages of like 10 to 18. Because when you have a lot of that experience, you can develop it organically. Everybody's kind of like awkward and weird, and you can make mistakes, and it's all like this big learning process. And you get so much social practice growing up. But once you've left that arena, if you've left that arena without that practice, learning that past 18 or past 22 is very, very, very challenging. So earlier when you mentioned that you had an event where it's like practicing, like asking people out or whatever, yeah, that's a really positive, like doing things like that is I think a really good stepping stone to building that social acumen or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all credit goes to our Discord mods for like organizing that event and stuff. And so we have this event called Social Sandbox, which is exactly what it is. It's a sandbox where you can practice social skills. And what we tend to find is like even in places like our career coaching program and stuff like that, what we found is that giving people the opportunity to role play conversations, right? So if you're asking for something like a promotion or, you know, you want to work from home one day, we don't practice those conversations.
Yeah.
And so when you go into the conversation and even sort of we'll try to do on Discord and stuff like these different kind of reverse role plays and stuff like that, where, okay, so now I'm going to play you and I'm going to ask for the promotion and you play your boss and you see how it feels because you're so worried. Oh my God, my boss is going to get pissed if I ask for more money. Well, why don't you listen to what I say and then you see, do you feel pissed off that I'm asking or does it sound good? Not good. And people like practice it, right? And we sort of do this like in some areas, like where you'll practice for medical school interviews or you'll practice for residency and things like that. We have some of these places where this is baked in, but the more digital our society is becoming, the more I'm finding that you need intentional like makeup times.
Yeah.
Where it's not organic. And the interesting thing is that if you really look at it, you may say, and this is what a lot of the people who struggle with like dating and have some of these incel beliefs, there's a core aspect of missed milestones where you think that, okay, I didn't date anyone in high school, therefore I can't have a girlfriend in college, therefore whatever. But if you look at human beings, the cool thing is that 8 years of organic learning can oftentimes be replaced by 6 months of intentional learning. So I can grow up speaking language, but if I do some kind of immersive like language thing for 6 months, like I can become fluent.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Because there's a saying that like it's not practice makes perfect, it's perfect practice makes perfect. So going into something with like an intentional mindset and practicing with deliberate practice is probably going to be more efficient even than like the natural like 8 to 15 years of like social practice we get, right? That's sloppy. And,
yeah, I mean that's so true. That's why people can play League of Legends for 10 years and be at the same rank.
Okay, I think we're done here. Is there anything else you need?
is that a dig? It wasn't
Oh
intended
no,
to be
no,
a dig
I'm
against
just
you.
fucking. No, I'm fucking. I'm like Hearthstone
I mean,
Diamond.
I'm getting
fucking
worse
better.
at Dota every year, so it's certainly the pot
That's
calling.
our aging genetics, okay? Or you just once you hit 30, you're just passed over the wall, you know.
One last thing, I did see this study really interesting. There's one, cognitive flexibility is the only mental capacity. It's not focus or attention or anything like that that correlates with rank in League of Legends.
Cognitive flexibility. Interesting. What does that mean?
The ability to be cognitively flexible. So if you have a belief,
Yeah.
being able to challenge that belief, right? So I lost this game because my teammates suck, and being able to challenge that belief and asking yourself, what could I do differently? Or even challenging, oh, what could I have done differently? Actually, I lost this game because honestly, I played pretty well, and my teammates really threw.
Oh,
So
sure. That makes
simply
sense.
the ability to be cognitively flexible.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. One thing I feel like the general trend of research is, I feel like even growing up in the 90s and 2000s, I feel like I was like, there's so much information about brain plasticity and how it basically stops when you're like 27 and you can't learn new things, and if you don't learn a language at that age, you're basically completely screwed. And it feels like as I've gotten older, it feels like we are radically changing our views of plasticity, and it has more to do with like how active your mind stays through like later stages of your life, and that somebody can have a lot of like plasticity in their 50s, 60s, 70s, as long as you don't just like repeat the same routine every single day, never see any new information, and never pick up a new task.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of new stuff. So we actually, I think we have a video about coming out about this, or maybe it's already out. But it's really interesting why people don't learn from their mistakes. So there's a really fascinating paper in Nature where they were looking at rats. And what they did is so there's this experiment where you have like a bucket of water, and submerged in the bucket of water is a platform, which you can't see, but is there. So they drop a rat in a bucket of water, and the rat panics, starts swimming around, and eventually figures out where the platform is. So the rat learns, okay, this is where a safe spot is. If you drop the rat in the bucket again, over time it goes straight to the platform. Then it doesn't even have a stress response. It's like, okay, we're back here. This is where I'm chilling.
Yeah.
So then what they do is they mix things up on the rat. They move the location of the platform. And what they discover is that some rats keep going to the old platform, and they panic because it's no longer there. Some rats are cognitively flexible and can figure out, okay, the old platform isn't there. This is where the new platform is, and they learn quickly. So really interesting. So in terms of plasticity, we used to think that plasticity was a function of age.
Yeah.
What we now know is that the most important variable for those rats to learn something new is their glucose level and whether they were in a fasting state. If you're in a caloric restriction, the rats learned very quickly. And if the rats were fed well, they learned very, very slowly.
Interesting.
And so one of the biggest things that's really interesting is if you think about the brain, when does the brain evolutionarily need to discard what it learned? When we're starving. Because when we're starving, the stuff that we used to do no longer works. And so if you kind of think about it, why do people today not learn from their mistakes? Why are people hard stuck on bronze in League of Legends? Because there's no caloric consequence. So literally the way that our brain is wired to learn new things, and this has been correlated with neurogenesis in the hippocampus, which is making new neurons, is if we are in a starvation state, and specifically the most important signal for that starvation state is glucose, which is part of the reason why I think all these keto diets and all this crap is like being very, very positive right now, because we're discovering that if I get to like eat carbohydrates and I play League of Legends every day, I'm actually not going to get better.
Okay, so when I play League in the future, I need to do it while I'm fasting.
Yeah, so a fasting state will induce neurogenesis, literally. Fasting state induces neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is correlated with cognitive flexibility. Those are kind of similar. And cognitive flexibility, literally, there's studies that show, or one study that shows that correlates with rank and LoL.
Interesting.
Really bizarre. And this is why also, if you look at esports teams, like they'll hire chefs who will feed their players like really healthy food because it correlates with performance improvement.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, okay. So you're right, by the way. And this is why, I mean, so Steven, what I really respect about you, man, is like so many of your woo-woo ideas are like spot on. It's really cool.
Well, cool. I appreciate it. Thank you very
And
much.
I would encourage you to not be afraid to put them on paper and be beholden to them, because you may be more, you're kind of talking about, okay, well, what if in the future I change my mind? What I think would be super cool is the predictive capability of what you put on paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, there are some, like I said, there are a few, there are like 4 or 5 things that I kind of like hold on to that I think have been relatively true through time, but I'll hopefully keep adding to that list as time goes on. Yeah.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, thank you very much for talking today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good luck with all of your podcasts and stuff.
Yeah, hopefully in a month or two, maybe I'm back on Twitch. We'll see if they unban me when my next appeal comes up. But otherwise, yeah, if you ever want to do talks like this, you can always shoot me a DM and we can cut it up on or chop it up on YouTube. And yeah.
Yeah, cool, man. Take care and thank you very much and good luck with everything.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I will talk to you sometime later. Have fun.
Adios, man.
Bye.
Oh, let's go. Oh, I'm trying to figure out. There we go. Alrighty. Actually, let me just ask him if he's streaming. Because then we can rate him. That was great. So I love talking to Destiny. Super cool dude. And I'm honestly, I'm amazed at, okay. So we're gonna go his way in a second, but if y'all want to, we can take a look at this real quick. Let's see if I can find this. Nope. HE literature. It's this one. You guys want to see this real quick? So we've got a video coming out about this if you guys have not seen it already. But looks like, yeah, it looks like our thing doesn't work, but there's a there really is a paper. So y'all will hopefully see this in the video. So we've got a video coming out because we were trying to figure out like there's a basic problem of why don't people learn from their mistakes? Right? And y'all may have seen this, but like, or y'all may have experienced this. I know this certainly happened with me, where like I knew I was screwing up, but I couldn't do anything about it. And I was like, this is a mistake. But it's like something about understanding that up here would not translate into my brain. And I'd make the same damn mistake again. The buzzing is my fan that I need to fix. And I don't know how to fix it because I don't know which one's making the noise. Yeah, so the paper is, this is the name of the paper. Cognitive flexibility and decision-making predicts expertise in the MOBA esport League of Legends. With the primary author being Carlos Valls Serrano. And is published in Sage Open Access. And is from the Department of Psychology in Universidad Católica de Murcia, España. Cool, huh? Yeah, so check that out. And then we're going to try to figure out... So a couple of things. So we're going to be streaming probably on Friday. I think we're going to be... I don't know. Just stay tuned to different platforms. Because some days we're streaming on Twitch. Some days we're streaming on YouTube. Twitch streams may or may not be uploaded to YouTube. Not all of our live streams are uploaded to YouTube. So catch us live if you can. And then we're also going to be popping up here and there on other people's channels. So we're doing a lot of different podcasts and stuff like that. We're going to American Psychiatric Association May 20th to 27th. Maybe not for that whole time, but somewhere in that window. So we're going to be out and about. So we're also going to be focused on giving y'all a lot of really solid videos on really common topics that people struggle with. For example, how do you learn from your mistakes? And so stay tuned to all that. A couple of other things to keep in mind. For those of y'all that have tried to sign up for coaching recently, we've been at between 95 and 99% capacity for like almost a month and a half now. So there are a couple spots here or there, but we apologize for that. but coaching does seem to really help people in our community. We see a lot of good outcomes from it. We presented last year at APA. We're going to be hopefully talking about it some this year. And I think it goes back to a lot of the stuff that Destiny was kind of talking about how, our system of healthcare is really focused on sick care. You can get someone to give you a heart transplant, but you're not going to get a doctor to teach you how to exercise. And what is the mental correlation of that? That's why we do coaching. And coaching was something that I sort of discovered, or I didn't discover it. The chief of psychiatry at McLean Hospital, which is a Harvard Medical School teaching affiliate and the #1 psychiatric hospital in the country, or #2 psychiatric hospital in the country, depending on the year, was listening to the work that I do. And he's like, hey, you should really check out coaching. And what I discovered was something that I had kind of felt a lot when I was doing therapy is that, okay, so therapy is really good at helping people with pathology, but it's pretty hit or miss. I'm not saying that there aren't good therapists at this. There are a lot of really good therapists at this who are especially like trained in things like positive psychology and stuff like that, who will help people build their lives. And it's kind of the stuff that Destiny was talking about how do I get up and leave the house? How do I form relationships? How do I, how do I build life? And what I really found is that was what was missing, which is why we started this coaching program. And if y'all are interested in more deep dives into mental health topics, so definitely you can check out things like our YouTube channel, right? So we've got about 400 videos on our YouTube channel. And then we also have Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health, which is sort of my deep dive into things like depression, anxiety, meditation, and ADHD. And the thing about the Dr. K's Guide is it's not just focused on the pathology or the diagnosis. But for example, in the ADHD guide, about 60% of it is how to do stuff. So like, where does motivation come from? How can you control your environment to improve your productivity? So it's all these skills that will oftentimes teach people who have ADHD to bring them back to functional. But the cool thing is these are the very same skills that if you're already at baseline, you can implement these to become kind of like optimize your productivity and functionality. And even in stuff like the depression guide, we'll talk about things like, how I think about bipolar disorder or depression, but we'll also talk about things like existential depression or identity and how I form my identity of myself. And in the anxiety guide, we'll teach you all kinds of different stuff around, regulating your physiology and things like that. So if y'all are interested in that stuff, check that out. And we also try to do, a lot of stuff for free on YouTube and things like that. So in that vein, we're going to do a deep dive into trauma, probably on Friday, where I'm going to explain trauma. And I wish that I could do a 20-minute YouTube video on it, or I wish I could do a meme react to it, and we could. But if y'all really want to understand trauma is the one thing that we've sort of, in a sense, steered clear of, just because I have not, for the last 3 years, I've been trying to figure out how to reduce this to like 5 tips that you can do. But I think trauma is really the one topic that you really have to do a deep dive. So we're going to kind of do that. May not be quite as entertaining, may not be quite as short form, may require a little bit more of an attention span, but we just can't do it justice without doing it in depth. So feel free to check us out for that. And for those of y'all that are struggling with that, we hope it'll be helpful. Just a reminder that everything that we do is really not a substitute for mental health treatment. And we are not saying that just for medical legal reasons, because if you're, if you're struggling with something like suicidality or having difficulty getting out of bed, things like that, you should absolutely see a therapist or professional. And even a lot of the people in our program, so I want to say somewhere between 10 and 30% of people in coaching are concurrently in therapy. And the two are very complementary. They're not substitutes. So your coach will help you sort of plan your day, figure out what you want to do in life, help you overcome motivational blocks, and your therapist will help you with things like, depression or bipolar disorder or stuff like that. And there is, where I think we have a manuscript that's being reviewed for publication, where we do see good mental health outcomes in terms of our coaching program. So while we see things like 25 to 35% reductions in scientifically validated instruments that measure things like mood and anxiety, it's not a treatment for that. It just turns out that when you start building a life that you're excited about and you get up every day and you're like, you ended up getting that promotion, or you ended up finding that relationship or things like that. When you start making progress in life, we sort of see that all boats rise together. So we do see positive outcomes in some of those dimensions. So check it out if y'all want. And then Gatro is saying the positive impact you've had is worth $1 million. Well, I appreciate the $1.99. Really, that's what we're here for, right? So we recognize that we all need to learn about mental health, and we all need to learn how to take care of our mental health. And we also recognize that we have, by the way, this is pretty cool. So we've reached people in 132 countries. And we recognize that not everyone is in a position where they can afford therapy, let alone coaching or even something like Dr. K's guide. And so we're going to do our best to try to do whatever we can for y'all. And if you can't afford anything, that's okay. We're going to do the best that we can. If you guys can contribute a little bit with a donation here or there, we're going to take that money and we're going to turn it into stuff. Hopefully we'll have something cool that'll be completely free that'll be launching by the end of the month. We're in our testing phase. Sometimes things take a little bit longer. But any money that you do send our way is stuff that we are going to use to try to help y'all more. So we're grateful for everything that y'all have to give. So we're hopefully going to have a cool thing for y'all. And by the way, our Discord events are also completely free. So things like Social Sandbox, which we have maybe twice a month, Ask a Coach, where if y'all have questions that we can't get to on stream or things like that, right? Because we reach about 3 to 8 million people a month. A lot of y'all have questions. I don't have time for all of them. I'm sorry. That's why we have these events on Discord and stuff like that. They're super cool. And Discord also has all kinds of other features and stuff like how to get healthy and accountability tracking and things like that. So Coach GPT, maybe, right? Maybe. We'll see. Maybe we'll have a conversation before the end of the month or a video about can ChatGPT replace therapists. We'll see. Yeah, so the real Jacob 98 is saying educational stuff about mental health if you can't afford mental health treatment. Absolutely. And this is what we really believe is that mental health treatment and education about mental health are two different things, right? So if you think about in class, we have PE, at least in the United States, physical education. We literally have a class in physical education where we teach people how to run and play basketball. In sports, we actually intentionally teach people how to use their body. And what we tend to find is that we don't have that for mental health education. So that's really what we try to do here at HG. We're not trying to be a substitute for mental health treatment. What we're acknowledging is that everyone should understand their mind because you're going through your life using this thing. But we don't understand how it works. Right? Like literally there's studies that show that neurogenesis in the hippocampus, which is where we learn, is stimulated by caloric restriction. And that's really interesting. Right? And so there's all kinds of stuff about how my mind works. How do I process emotions? How do I do different stuff? How do I optimize this thing? We know how to use this thing. We have buttons that we can program. But we don't know how to use this. And that's what we try to teach you. The positive impact is worth $20 US. Thanks for the chat today. Thanks for the tip or the donation. We really appreciate it. We will use that money to try to help more people more, including you. And someone's asking, is 40 too old to sign up? I don't know what you're referring to, but it ain't too old to sign up for anything. IMO. It's not too old to show up in Discord. It's not too old to watch Dr. K's guide. It's not too old to do coaching. Not at all. Not enough nails spam? What does that mean, Andrew? You've given me nail spam. Thanks for the £50 donation. Appreciate it. I don't know what nails we're talking about. I don't know if I got jabated. Did I just get jabated? Will coaching help you build study habits? Okay, here's how coaching, if you're a student, I think what coaching, so coach will not explicitly tell you this is how you should study. We have YouTube videos for that. What a coach will help you do is clarify why you want to study in the first place. Here's why building study habits is hard. Y'all want to understand this in a nutshell? Someone's asking, how do I build study habits? You know what to do. The reason is you're not motivated enough to actually do it, because building study habits is an energy investment. And you're not willing to pay the price. Why? Because why do you want to study? Because I'm supposed to. Because I'm supposed to is not a good enough reason to beat this. So how does coaching help? Coaching helps because it helps you figure out a reason that is more important than this. That's what they're experts in. 58% improvement in purpose or motivation. Purpose, life purpose. It's somewhere between 12 and 16 weeks. Y'all get that? So a lot of people will come and be like, are you going to teach me how to do this? No, we're not going to teach you. Coaching isn't about teaching. It's about helping you uncover things so that you can implement what you need to learn. The problem in today's world is not that you need to be taught. There's an abundance of information. Right? You can Google, how do I study? How do I build study habits? Go to the library at the same time every day. Put your phone on silent mode. Uninstall all of your video games. Everyone has the information. The problem isn't the information. And this is why it doesn't work, because you can look at that crap over and over and over again. We know what we need to do. We just can't bring ourselves to do it. That's what we specialize in. So understand what drives you. It's not a lack of information problem. Maybe 500 years ago it was a lack of information problem. Now it's a driver problem. Right? So when I'm like working as an addiction psychiatrist, how do I quit alcohol? How do I stop smoking pot? How do I get rid of my marijuana addiction? You have to have a good reason. That's the first place I start with. Why? Because my wife or my husband is making me. Not going to work. You can get 3 months of sobriety that way. You can get maybe even 6. Not going to work. So like unlocking that motivation is really the most important part. That's what we specialize in. So are there plans to work directly with teachers or working with schools, or is this happening already? We would love to. So we've done stuff with schools in the past. But I think that what schools need mental health education curricula, but teachers also need help. So teachers are at an unprecedented rate of burnout, and they need support too. If y'all know anything about this, let us know. Like post in our subreddit or something like that. And we'd love, like if y'all know how to do that, please let us know. Because we'd love to support teachers and schools. Okay. Why don't y'all, it seems like we have to... Where do attendees play into this? Do you have anything on self-harm? Scattered in various places, but we may cover it in our trauma deep dive on Friday. Yeah, so this is why like everyone's asking about DID and self-harm and stuff like that. We're going to dig into all of it. I don't know that we're going to do something specifically on DID, but we'll absolutely talk about the mechanism and purpose of dissociation. Will we do longer form meditation videos? So we have longer form meditation videos on YouTube and in Dr. K's guide. Dr. K's guide has like something like 30 to 40 meditation videos. How can I support you if I can't donate money directly? The most important thing that you can do for us is to take whatever help we're offering and do something with it in your own life. That's the most important thing. That's why we're here. We're here for you, not for us. Beyond that, if you want to do something for us, share our stuff with your friends if you think something is useful to them, right? So that too should be, the value should be for the people that you give it to. Don't share it. I mean, don't share it just because it would help us. That does help, right? But like liking, subscribing, sharing our videos, things like that. Like, you know, if there's something that we do that you think could be helpful to someone else, let someone else know. That's helpful to us. We'll earn like 0.02 cents from YouTube for every view that we get, or whatever nominal amount, and that helps, right? Do you all have anything about overcoming racialized trauma? Not really. That's why we're starting with this deep dive. We're going to explain the basics of trauma. Updated my crappy IKEA chair. Yeah, so that, I suppose y'all can thank these people who are donating, right? Because like for 3 years I had a second-hand IKEA chair. And so we're grateful for all the support that y'all send our way. Helps my back. That's actually why I got it, because I was sitting in this chair too long and it was messing with my back. Okay, so Dr. K, I'm a residential counselor for hospitalized OCD. So post something in subreddit, or message like our mods on Reddit, and they'll send us the request. We'd love to do some kind of stuff like that. We've got a lot of different collaborations in the works. So, yeah, appreciate all the stuff that y'all send our way. So Abhinav Barman is saying, Dr. K, I was a perceived gifted student. I know what to do, my life back on track, but I'm unable to create the connection between my thought process and my actions. Please give me some advice. So check out our video on neurogenesis that's going to be coming out soon, but also check out all the stuff on gifted kids, right? We talk about that a lot. And maybe even check out the stuff on trauma, because you'll be surprised. Hi, Doc, can you cook? Absolutely, of course. All right. So I can't, it seems like I can't redirect y'all, but y'all should check out Destiny. And we will, yeah. I'm confused. Am I getting into some kind of meme or something? What am I running? Okay, is that Destiny? This YouTube link? It's a subscriber only mode. And apparently I've not subscribed to our own channel. Okay, so no matter how brilliant and successful we are, we shall always be scuffed, chat. We shall always be scuffed. All right, check out Destiny. My voice is going out. I've got to do a deep dive on trauma on Friday, so I have to preserve this for the future. Take care, everybody.